The rain came down like judgment. Cold. Relentless. Each drop a tiny blade against skin already torn and bruised. Lunara stumbled through the forest, her bare feet slipping on moss-slicked roots, her breath tearing from her lungs in ragged gasps that burned more than the cuts across her ribs. Behind her, the howls rose again, sharp, triumphant, hungry. They were close. Too close. And they weren't stopping. She pressed one hand against the nearest tree trunk, trying to steady herself, trying to think through the panic that threatened to swallow her whole. The bark was rough under her palm, grounding her for just a heartbeat, but it wasn't enough. Nothing was ever enough. Not for someone like her. Not for the girl born without the mark that proved she belonged to anyone, to anything. Not for the Omega they'd decided was less than nothing. The forest around her was alive with night sounds. The rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the scurrying of small creatures fleeing the storm. But all of it was background noise to the pounding of her heart and the thunder of paws against earth. They were hunting her. Again. Always. And this time, she knew with a certainty that settled like ice in her stomach, they weren't planning to let her crawl back. She'd heard them talking before they'd cornered her near the pack house. Elder Rorik's voice, low and venomous, had carried through the wooden slats of the storage shed where she'd been hiding after her shift cleaning the ceremonial hall. The prophecy speaks of a cursed bloodline, one that will bring ruin to all we've built. And the pause had been filled with such loathing that Lunara had pressed herself smaller into the shadows. She carries the stench of it. I can feel it. We all can. Someone had laughed. Breck, probably. He'd always taken particular pleasure in her suffering. Then we end it tonight. No mark, no mate, no witnesses. The elders will thank us. No witnesses. The words chased her now as surely as the wolves at her back. She'd run the moment she'd heard them moving, had slipped through a gap in the fence she'd discovered months ago during another beating, another humiliation. But they'd been ready. They'd known she would run. And they'd been waiting. A root caught her ankle, and she went down hard, her hands scraping against stone, pain lancing up her wrists. For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't think past the white-hot agony and the terror that froze her limbs. Get up. Get up. Get up. The words were a scream inside her mind, but her body felt like it belonged to someone else, someone weaker, someone who'd finally given up. Then she heard it, the snap of a branch, close enough that she could feel the vibration through the ground. Close enough that when she lifted her head, gasping, she could see the gleam of eyes through the rain. Yellow. Hungry. Merciless. She rolled to her side and forced herself upright, ignoring the way her vision swam, ignoring the blood she could taste in her mouth. There was a ridge ahead, barely visible through the storm, and beyond it, what? More forest? A cliff? It didn't matter. Anywhere was better than here, better than facing what they would do to her if they caught her. Her legs trembled as she ran, her whole body screaming in protest. She'd been weak even before tonight, half-starved on the scraps they threw her way, exhausted from the endless labor they demanded. Omegas were meant to serve. But mateless Omegas? They were meant to suffer. To be reminded every day that they were broken, wrong, cursed by the moon herself. Lunara had heard the whispers her whole life. That her mother had been touched by dark magic. That her father had been an outsider, a rogue who'd seduced a pack wolf and left poison in her bloodline. That Lunara herself was the result of that poison, a girl who should never have been born, who existed only to remind them that sometimes the moon made mistakes. She'd tried to be small. Tried to be invisible. Tried to earn their acceptance through silence and submission and endless, back-breaking work. But it was never enough. And now, with this new prophecy circulating through the pack like fever, they'd found their excuse to finish what they'd started years ago. The ridge was steeper than she'd thought. She clawed her way up, her fingers digging into mud and loose stones, her breath coming in sobs now. Behind her, the howls split into harmony, 3 voices, maybe 4. They were coordinating, playing with her, letting her tire herself out before they moved in for the kill. When she reached the top, she realized her mistake. The ridge didn't lead to more forest. It led to nothing. A sheer drop into darkness, the bottom lost in rain and shadow. She could hear water rushing somewhere far below, violent and wild, but she couldn't see it. Couldn't judge if the fall would kill her or just break her enough that drowning would finish the job. She turned, pressing her back against a boulder at the ridge's edge, and faced them. They emerged from the tree line one by one, their wolf forms massive and powerful in the storm's gray light. Breck was in the lead, his russet coat dark with rain, his lips pulled back to show teeth meant for tearing, for rending, for ending things that shouldn't exist. Beside him, two others, Kael and Jorah. Enforcers. The pack's muscle. And behind them, hanging back in the shadows, a fourth shape. Smaller. Watching. Lunara's hands curled into fists at her sides. She had no claws to speak of. Her wolf was small, stunted, the sort of shift that made the others laugh when they bothered to acknowledge it at all. But she wasn't going to die on her knees. Wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice raw but steady. Louder than she'd ever dared speak to them before. "Whatever you think I am, whatever they told you, I'm not. I'm just..." Breck's growl cut her off. Low. Final. The sound of a predator who'd already decided its prey was dead. She felt something then. Something she'd felt before in moments of terror or rage or desperation, but never this strong, never this clear. It started deep in her chest, beneath her heart, beneath her ribs, a warmth that didn't match the cold rain, a pulse that wasn't her heartbeat. It spread through her veins like fire, like light, like something ancient waking from a long sleep. Her vision blurred, and for a moment she saw things that couldn't be real. The forest around her lit from within, every tree glowing with silver veins that pulsed in time with that strange rhythm in her chest. The wolves before her were suddenly transparent, their bones visible, their hearts beating visible, and wrapped around each of them were threads, golden, bright, connecting them to each other, to the pack, to something vast and invisible that hummed with power. And she had no threads, no connections, nothing tying her to anything. Except there was something else. Something coiled inside her like a sleeping serpent, something that shimmered with colors she had no names for. It stirred at the wolves' approach, unfurling just slightly, and the temperature around her spiked. The rain hissed as it struck her skin, turning to steam, and she saw Breck hesitate, his ears flattening, uncertainty flickering across his canine features. Then the vision was gone and she was just Lunara again, cold, bleeding, cornered. But the warmth remained. The pulse remained. And some part of her, some part she'd spent her whole life trying to bury, whispered that she could use it. That she could make them stop. That she could. No, she couldn't. Because she didn't know what it was or how to control it, and every time it had surfaced before, when she was 8 and angry, when she was 12 and terrified, when she was 15 and cornered in an alley by pack mates who thought mateless meant available. It had flickered and died before she could grasp it. And the aftermath had always been worse. More beatings. More isolation. More proof that she was exactly what they said she was. Cursed. Breck lunged. She didn't think. Didn't plan. She just threw herself sideways, towards the drop, towards the void, because falling was better than fangs in her throat. Her shoulder hit the edge, and the world tilted, gravity seizing her, the ground disappearing beneath her feet. For a heartbeat she was weightless, suspended between earth and air, and in that heartbeat she felt the thing inside her surge, desperate, wild, trying to catch her, trying to. Then she was falling. The wind tore at her, the rain blinded her, and somewhere above she heard a howl, rage or surprise or something else. She didn't care. She tucked her arms around her head and prayed the water below was deep enough, prayed it would be quick, prayed that whatever came next wouldn't hurt as much as living had. The impact drove the air from her lungs. Cold swallowed her whole, black water closing over her head, currents seizing her like a living thing. She tumbled, couldn't find up, couldn't breathe, her chest screaming for air while the river dragged her downstream. Something solid hit her side, a rock, a log. and pain exploded through her, bright and consuming. She broke the surface for just a moment, gasped in a mouthful of air and water, saw the sky above her spinning, clouds racing across the moon. Then under again, down into darkness that pressed against her eyes, her ears, her thoughts. Her lungs burned. Her limbs were lead. The current was too strong and she was too tired, too broken, too ready. The word came from nowhere and everywhere. Not a voice. A knowing. A certainty that settled into her bones as the cold leached away her strength. If she was going to die, if this was the end, then she would die as herself. Not as the Mateless Omega. Not as the cursed thing they'd tried to make her. But as Lunara. Just Lunara. The girl who'd survived 22 years of hell and had never once stopped hoping there was something more waiting for her. The girl who'd looked at the stars on clear nights and felt a pulling in her chest towards places she'd never seen, towards a life she'd never been allowed to have. The girl who'd always known, deep down in a place she'd never dared examine, that the emptiness where her mate Mark should have been wasn't emptiness at all. It was waiting. Her eyes drifted closed. The current gentled, or maybe she'd just stopped fighting it. Either way, the darkness was almost peaceful now, almost kind, and she let herself sink into it, let herself. Hands. Strong. Sure. Closing around her wrist, her waist. Pulling her up towards air and light, and she broke the surface with a gasp that was half scream, water streaming from her nose and mouth, her lungs heaving. The hands didn't let go. They dragged her towards the bank, towards solid ground, and she couldn't do anything but cough and shake and try to remember how to breathe. When her knees hit mud, she collapsed forward, retching river water, her whole body convulsing. Someone was beside her, she could feel their presence, solid and warm and impossibly calm, but she couldn't look, couldn't do anything but survive the next breath and the next and the next. Easy. The voice was male. Deep. Layered with something that made her wolf stir despite her exhaustion. You're safe. Breathe. Safe. The word was so foreign she almost laughed. But her lungs were too busy trying to function, so she focused on that instead. In. Out. In. Out. The rain had gentled to a drizzle, or maybe they'd just moved somewhere more sheltered. She couldn't tell. Couldn't think past the cold and the pain and the impossible fact that she was alive. Finally, when her breathing had steadied enough that she wasn't gasping, she forced her head up. And froze. The man crouched beside her was unlike anyone she'd ever seen. Tall, even kneeling. Broad-shouldered. His hair was dark and wet, falling across a face that was all sharp angles and harder edges, strong jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Gold. Not the yellow of wolf eyes in the dark, but true gold, bright and intense and fixed on her with a focus that made her feel seen in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. He was bare-chested, his skin marked with scars that told stories of battles survived, and around his neck hung a pendant that pulsed with a faint silver light. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, controlled, banked, but unmistakable. This was no ordinary wolf. This was Alpha, she breathed, and the word tasted like smoke and steel. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in those gold eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or satisfaction. You know what I am. It wasn't a question. She nodded anyway, unable to look away, unable to process any of this. An Alpha had pulled her from the river. An Alpha had saved her. But why? How? She'd never seen him before, had never felt his presence in pack territory, and Alphas didn't just wander the wilderness alone. They didn't rescue drowning Omegas. They certainly didn't kneel in the mud beside them and look at them like she mattered. Why? The word came out broken, barely audible over the whisper of rain. Why did you? Because I've been looking for you. He reached out slowly, deliberately, giving her time to flinch away. When she found she couldn't, his hand brushed her cheek, tilting her face towards the moonlight that had broken through the clouds. His thumb traced something near her temple, featherlight, and she felt that warmth in her chest flare in response. And, because they were fools not to see what you are. Her breath caught. I'm nothing. I'm mateless, You're a liar. But there was no anger in his voice. Only certainty. Only truth. You feel it, don't you? The power in your blood. The thing they fear. Yes. The answer rose unbidden, undeniable. She'd felt it her whole life. Felt it reaching for something she couldn't name, couldn't claim. Felt it burning beneath her skin every time they hurt her, every time they reminded her she was less. But she'd learned to bury it, to silence it, because power in the hands of a mateless Omega was just another reason for them to hate her. His hand dropped from her face and he stood, extending the other towards her in clear invitation. Come with me, Lunara. Her name in his mouth was a shock that jolted through her entire body. She hadn't told him. Hadn't spoken since he'd pulled her from the water except to gasp that single word, Alpha. But he knew. Had known before he'd saved her, had maybe known before he'd even found her. The realization should have terrified her. Should have sent her scrambling away despite her exhaustion, despite the pain, despite everything. Instead, she found herself reaching up. Found her fingers closing around his. Found his strength lifting her effortlessly to her feet, and when she swayed, he steadied her with a hand at her lower back that burned through her soaked clothing like brand. Where, she managed. Where are we? Somewhere they can't follow. He glanced back towards the forest, towards the direction she'd fled from, and his eyes hardened. Somewhere you can finally stop running. Stop running. The idea was so impossible, so utterly foreign, that for a moment she couldn't even process it. She'd been running her entire life. Running from their hatred, their fists, their words that cut deeper than any claw. Running from the truth of what she was, from the power that whispered promises she was too afraid to believe. Running from a destiny she'd never asked for but couldn't escape. But this man. This Alpha whose name she didn't know, whose pack she'd never heard of, whose very existence felt like something out of the old stories Elder Morna used to tell before the pack had forbidden her from speaking to the mateless girl. He was offering her something she'd only ever dreamed about in her darkest, most desperate moments. A chance. She should have questioned it. Should have demanded answers, explanations, proof that this wasn't just another cruelty, another trap, another way for the world to remind her that girls like her didn't get happy endings. But she was so tired. So cold. So done with surviving when she'd never truly been allowed to live. And there was something else. Something in the way he looked at her, in the way his power called to that thing sleeping in her blood, in the way the air between them felt charged with recognition. As if they'd known each other in some other life, some other world. As if this moment, him finding her, saving her, offering his hand, was always meant to happen. If you're lying, she said quietly, meeting those gold eyes with what little strength she had left, if this is some kind of... I don't lie. He said it simply. Absolutely. Like lying was beneath him, beneath whatever code he lived by. And I don't make promises I can't keep. But I promise you this, Lunara. If you come with me, if you trust me even for tonight, I will show you exactly what they were trying to destroy. Trust. Another foreign concept. Another impossible ask. But the alternative was to stay here, to try to make it back to Pack territory where Breck and the others were undoubtedly waiting. To face the judgment of elders who'd already decided her fate. To die slowly or quickly, but to die either way, because there was no future for a mateless Omega accused of carrying cursed blood. She nodded. Once. Sharp. His expression shifted, not quite a smile, but something close. Something that made him look younger, less like the hardened warrior and more like someone who understood what her trust cost. He released her hand only to shrug out of a jacket she hadn't noticed he was wearing, dark leather, lined with fur, and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm from his body heat and smelled like pine and smoke and something wilder, something that made her wolf keen softly in recognition. Then he turned and started walking, not towards the ridge where she'd fallen, not towards the pack, but deeper into the forest, towards the wild places where no marked trails existed, where only rogues and outcasts dared to tread. Lunara hesitated for only a moment before following. Behind them, distant but growing fainter, another howl rose into the night. Breck, probably. Calling the hunt off or calling for reinforcements. It didn't matter. She wasn't that girl anymore, the one who'd cowered in storage sheds and flinched at raised voices and apologized for existing. She was walking into the unknown beside an alpha who'd seen something in her worth saving. And for the first time in her entire life, that warmth in her chest, that power they'd called a curse, pulsed not with fear, but with anticipation. Whatever came next, whatever he was leading her towards, it had to be better than what she'd left behind. Because nothing could be worse than living as a ghost in her own life, invisible except when they needed someone to hurt. The rain stopped. The moon emerged fully from the clouds, casting silver light across the forest floor. And Lunara kept walking, kept following, kept hoping that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of the story she was always meant to live. The one where she was more than their victim. The one where she was exactly who she was meant to be. They walked in silence broken only by the drip of water from leaves and the soft crunch of their footsteps on forest floor. Lunara kept her eyes on the ground, partly because exhaustion made lifting her head feel like an impossible task, partly because she wasn't ready to face whatever expression might be on the alpha's face. Pity would destroy her. Disgust would confirm everything she'd spent her life trying to disprove. And curiosity. Well, curiosity was dangerous in ways she couldn't afford to examine. The jacket around her shoulders was heavy, grounding. She pulled it tighter, letting herself sink into the warmth, into the scent that clung to the leather. It was doing something to her wolf, something that should have alarmed her but instead felt like the first deep breath after years of suffocation. Her wolf, usually so quiet, so subdued by malnutrition and mistreatment, was pressing against her consciousness with an insistence that bordered on desperate. Recognize him. Know him. Claim him. The thoughts weren't hers. Couldn't be hers. Because claiming anyone required a mark, required a bond, required the very thing she'd been born without. And yet her wolf was certain in a way Lunara had never felt certain about anything. As if this stranger wasn't a stranger at all. As if some part of her had been waiting her entire life for him to appear. She stumbled over a route she hadn't seen and his hand was there instantly, not grabbing, not forcing, just steadying. Present. When she'd righted herself, he didn't let go immediately. His palm remained against her elbow, warm even through the wet fabric of her dress, and she felt that now familiar pulse of heat travel from the point of contact straight to her chest. "We're almost there," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made her finally look up. He was watching her. Had probably been watching her this entire walk while she'd been staring at the ground like a coward. But there was no judgment in those gold eyes, no impatience. Only an intensity that made her feel stripped bare, seen in ways that went beyond the physical. As if he could read every fear, every hope, every desperate wish she'd ever buried deep enough that even she forgot they existed. "Where is there?" Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Small victory. Somewhere safe." He released her elbow but gestured ahead, where the trees were beginning to thin. "Somewhere I've been using while I investigate the disturbances in this territory." Disturbances. The word sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. She'd heard whispers about them, about strange things happening at the borders, about scouts going missing, about the way the forest itself seemed to be changing, growing darker, more hostile. The elders had blamed rogues, then rival packs, then finally settled on their favorite explanation for anything they couldn't understand or control. Cursed blood. Her blood. "The disturbances aren't my fault," she said, and hated how defensive she sounded. "How small?" "Whatever they told you, whatever you heard, I didn't." "I know." He cut her off gently but firmly, still moving forward. "The disturbances started long before your power began to wake. Before you were even born, if the records I've uncovered are accurate." She froze. He stopped a few paces ahead and turned back to her, patient in a way that made her chest ache. My power isn't, I don't have the lies tangled on her tongue. She'd spent so long denying it, burying it, pretending that the heat in her blood was just fever or imagination or anything except what it actually was. But he'd already called her a liar once tonight. And something about this man made her want to be truthful, even if the truth terrified her. I don't know what it is, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've felt it since I was a child, but every time it surfaces, I can't control it. It just flickers and dies and makes everything worse. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, surprisingly, he closed the distance between them. Stood close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could see the faint pulse at his throat, could count the scars that marked his collarbone. That's because no one taught you. His voice had dropped lower, intimate in a way that made her breath catch. That's because they were too afraid of what you'd become if you learned. Power like yours, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. It doesn't respond to fear or suppression. It responds to acceptance. To will. To the belief that you have every right to wield it. Every right. She'd never had rights. Had spent her existence apologizing for taking up space, for breathing air that belonged to wolves with marks and mates and purpose. The idea that she had a right to anything, let alone power, was so fundamentally opposed to everything she'd been taught that she couldn't process it. Who are you? The question burst out before she could stop it. You know my name, you know about what I am. But I don't even know what to call you. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement, but close. As if he found her boldness unexpected and pleasing. He stepped back, giving her space again, and when he spoke his voice carried a formality that hadn't been there before. Kaelan. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture that would have been respectful if it hadn't come from someone who clearly didn't need to show respect to anyone. Alpha King of the Northern Territories. Keeper of the old laws. And, apparently, the only one who recognized what you were the moment I laid eyes on you. Alpha King. The title hit her like a physical blow. She'd heard of him, of course. Everyone had. The Northern Territories were vast, powerful, ancient, ruled by bloodlines that traced back to the first wolves, to the time when the moon herself had walked among them. Alpha King Kaelan was a legend, spoken of in hushed tones even in her pathetic little pack. They said he was ruthless, brilliant, touched by magic that most wolves had forgotten existed. They said he'd united fractured territories through sheer force of will and strategic genius. They said he took no mate, trusted no counsel, answered to no one except the moon herself. And he was standing in front of her, soaking wet, claiming he'd been looking for her specifically. I don't, she shook her head, trying to clear it, trying to make any of this make sense. Why would an Alpha King care about a mateless Omega from nowhere? Why would you even be here, in this territory, looking for? Because 3 months ago, I started having dreams. He said it matter-of-factly, as if prophetic dreams were just another Tuesday occurrence. Dreams of a girl with silver fire in her veins and emptiness where her mate mark should be. Dreams of a bloodline everyone thought was extinct, waking up in the most unlikely of vessels. Dreams that showed me exactly where to find you, and exactly what would happen if I didn't reach you in time. Silver fire. The description made that warmth in her chest pulse hard enough that she gasped, one hand flying to her sternum. Kaelan's eyes tracked the movement, sharp and assessing. You feel it now, he observed. Stronger than before. That's because you're away from their suppression, away from the constant fear and denial. Your power knows it's safe to emerge. Safe, she echoed hollowly. I just got chased off a cliff by wolves who wanted me dead. I nearly drowned. I'm standing in the middle of a forest with a man I don't know who claims he's been dreaming about me. Nothing about this is safe. Isn't it? He tilted his head slightly, studying her. You're alive. You're away from those who would kill you. You're with someone who has no intention of letting harm come to you. And for the first time in your life, Lunara, you're in a place where you don't have to hide what you are. The words struck something deep inside her, something that had been locked away for so long she'd forgotten it existed. A longing so intense it hurt. A hunger for exactly what he was describing, a place where she didn't have to make herself smaller, quieter, less. Where she could just be. But longing and reality were different things. And reality was that Alpha Kings didn't rescue broken Omegas out of kindness. They didn't have prophetic dreams about nobodies. They didn't look at girls like her with anything except disgust or, at best, indifference. "What do you want from me?" She forced herself to ask it directly, forced herself to meet those gold eyes even though everything in her screamed to look away. "Because I don't believe in charity. And I don't believe you went through this much trouble just to be, what? Noble? Kind?" For the first time since she'd met him, Kaelan smiled. It was a small thing, barely a curve of his mouth, but it transformed his face. Made him look less like a legend and more like a man, dangerous, yes, but somehow more real. More reachable. "I want," he said slowly, deliberately, "to keep the realm from tearing itself apart. The disturbances I mentioned? They're getting worse. The barriers between territories are failing, old magic is surfacing in ways that are destroying everything it touches, and every seer I've consulted has told me the same thing. The only way to stop it is to find the lost bloodline and help them reclaim what was stolen." He took a step closer, and this time she didn't back away. Couldn't. Was caught by the weight of his gaze, by the absolute certainty in his voice. "You're that bloodline, Lunara. The last living heir to the Silvercrest line, though I doubt anyone in your pack even remembers that name. Your ancestor was the moon's chosen, blessed with power that could shape reality itself. But that blessing was seen as a threat by those who feared change, who wanted to keep wolves bound by hierarchy and tradition. So they hunted your line to near extinction. Killed your grandmother when your mother was just a child. Would have killed your mother too if she hadn't fled, hadn't hidden herself in a pack so small and insignificant that no one thought to look there." Each word landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading out to touch everything she thought she knew about herself, about her mother, about the absence that had haunted her entire life. Her mother had died in childbirth, that was the story she'd always been told. A weak Omega who couldn't survive bringing another weak Omega into the world. But if what Kaelan was saying was true, they killed her. It wasn't a question. The certainty settled into her bones, cold and final. "After I was born, they found her and they—" "Yes." His voice was soft, but not gentle. "Honest. The records suggest she fought to protect you, used the last of her power to hide what you were. That's why you were born without the mark. Not because you're mateless, but because she wove a concealment so strong that even the moon's traditional signs couldn't penetrate it. She made you invisible to save your life." Invisible. She'd been invisible her whole life. Had thought it was punishment, proof of her worthlessness. But it had been protection. Love. Her mother's final gift. The tears came before she could stop them, hot and sudden and devastating. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold them back, trying to maintain some shred of dignity in front of this man who was watching her fall apart. But 22 years of grief, of confusion, of wondering why she'd been born wrong, it all came pouring out in silent, wrenching sobs that shook her entire frame. She didn't hear him move. Didn't realize he'd closed the distance until his arms came around her, careful but sure, pulling her against his chest. She should have fought it. Should have pushed him away, maintained boundaries, protected what little pride she had left. Instead, she collapsed into him, her fingers clutching at his bare skin, her face pressed against his shoulder while she cried for the mother she'd never known, for the childhood she'd never had, for the girl she'd been forced to become. He didn't speak. Didn't offer empty platitudes or tell her it would be okay. He just held her, one hand moving in slow circles against her back, his presence solid and unwavering while she broke into pieces. And somehow that made it worse and better all at once, the fact that he understood grief didn't need words, that comfort could exist in silence, that sometimes the kindest thing was just to witness someone's pain without trying to fix it. When the tears finally slowed, when she could breathe without hitching, she realized how completely she'd melted into him. How her body had molded to his like it belonged there, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. His heart was beating steadily beneath her ear, his warmth seeping into her cold skin, and that thing in her chest, her power, her birthright, whatever it was humming contentedly, as if it had finally found its other half. She forced herself to step back. His arms loosened immediately, letting her go without resistance, but his eyes remained on her face, watchful and concerned. As if her tears had actually affected him, this legendary Alpha King who supposedly felt nothing for anyone. "I'm sorry," she started, scrubbing at her cheeks. "I didn't mean to." "Don't." The single word was quiet but absolute. "Don't apologize for feeling. Don't apologize for grieving. And don't ever apologize to me for showing me the truth of who you are." Who she was. She still didn't know. Thought she'd been nobody, nothing, a mistake. Now apparently she was the last heir to a bloodline powerful enough that people had tried to exterminate it. The whiplash was making her dizzy. "I don't know how to be what you're describing," she admitted, wrapping her arms around herself. "I don't know how to access this power or why the moon would choose someone like me. I've never been strong. Or brave. Or, you survived." Kaelan's voice cut through her spiral like a blade through silk. "You survived 22 years of abuse, of isolation, of being told you were worthless. You survived a hunt designed to kill you. You survived a fall that should have broken every bone in your body. Lunara, strength isn't the absence of fear or pain. It's continuing to exist despite them. And you've been doing that your entire life." The words settled around her like armor she hadn't known she needed. Made her stand a little straighter, breathe a little deeper. He was right. She had survived. Had woken up every morning and forced herself through another day even when death seemed like the easier option. Had kept her humanity, her hope, her capacity for kindness even when the world had given her every reason to become bitter and cruel. Maybe that was its own kind of power. "The place we're going," she said, changing the subject before she started crying again. "Is it far?" "Just ahead." He gestured to where the trees thinned into a clearing. "I've been using it as a base while I searched for you. It's protected by wards, old magic that will keep anyone with ill intent from finding it. You'll be safe there tonight, and in the morning we'll begin." "Begin what?" "Teaching you." He started walking again, and this time she followed without hesitation. "Your power isn't something that will simply emerge fully formed. It needs to be trained, directed, understood. The disturbances I mentioned are connected to your bloodline's magic. When your ancestor died, she fractured the barriers intentionally, hoping that one day her heir would return to repair them. But those fractures are spreading, causing instability across all territories. Storms that shouldn't exist, creatures crossing from the shadow realm, old battlegrounds waking up and replaying their violence." He glanced back at her, his expression grave. "If we don't stabilize the barrier soon, if we don't help you access your full power and use it to repair what was broken, the entire realm will collapse into chaos. Every pack, every territory, every wolf, all of it will be consumed by the magic that's currently unraveling." "No pressure, then." The laugh that escaped her was slightly hysterical. Kaelan's expression softened. "I know it's overwhelming. I know you've just learned that everything you believed about yourself was a lie, and now I'm telling you the fate of thousands rests on your shoulders. But Lunara," he stopped walking, turned to face her fully. "You won't be alone in this. I didn't search for you just to hand you an impossible task and walk away. I'm going to teach you, protect you, stand with you through whatever comes. Because that's what—" He cut himself off abruptly, something flickering across his face too quickly for her to identify. "That's what?" she prompted. "That's what needs to happen," he finished, but she had the distinct impression those weren't the words he'd originally intended to say. Before she could push further, they emerged into the clearing and she forgot how to breathe. The structure before them wasn't a cabin or a tent or anything she'd expected. It was a shrine. Ancient stone carved with symbols that glowed faintly silver in the moonlight, surrounded by trees that had grown in a perfect circle, their branches weaving together overhead to create a natural roof. The air here felt different. Cleaner. Charged with something that made her skin tingle and her wolf press forward with eager interest. "This is sacred ground," Kaelan said quietly, reverent in a way she hadn't heard from him before. One of the original moon shrines, from before the pacts fractured into territories. "I found it when I first arrived in this region, and I knew immediately it was meant for you." "Why?" He met her eyes, and in the silver glow of the shrine, she could see something in his expression that made her pulse skip. Something raw and unguarded and achingly vulnerable. "Because the moment I stepped inside, every ward, every piece of old magic embedded in this place, recognized me as your..." Again that pause, that careful editing. "As someone bound to your protection. The shrine itself marked me as your guardian, Lunara. And that means whatever else happens, whatever challenges we face, I am tied to you until this is finished." Guardian. The word should have felt limiting, formal. Instead it felt like a promise. Like a vow. And when he extended his hand toward her once more, inviting her into the shrine that pulsed with welcome, with recognition, with a warmth that matched the heat in her own chest, she didn't hesitate. She took his hand. Let him guide her forward. Let herself believe, just for this one night, that maybe she wasn't cursed after all. That maybe she was exactly what she was always meant to be. And maybe, just maybe, this man with gold eyes and careful hands and dreams that had led him across territories to find her was exactly who he was meant to be too. The shrine welcomed her like an old friend. That was the only way Lunara could describe it, the way the air seemed to part for her as she crossed the threshold, the way the silver glow intensified just slightly, the way the ancient stones hummed with a frequency that resonated in her bones. It felt like coming home to a place she'd never been, like remembering something she'd never learned. Her wolf was practically singing, pressing so close to the surface that she could feel the shift trying to take hold, eager and insistent in a way it hadn't been since she was a child. Kaelan released her hand once they were inside, and she immediately missed the contact. Missed the grounding warmth of his palm against hers, the certainty that radiated from him like light from a flame. But he was already moving deeper into the space, giving her room to absorb it all, and she was grateful for the distance even as part of her mourned it. The interior was larger than it had appeared from outside, old magic playing tricks with dimensions, probably. The floor was smooth stone worn soft by countless feet over countless years, and in the center burned a fire that gave off no smoke, its flames dancing in shades of silver and blue and white. Around the perimeter, carved into the walls themselves, were figures of wolves in various poses, hunting, howling, sleeping, running. But interspersed among them were other shapes, women with crowns of light, men with hands raised toward the moon, children playing in streams that seemed to flow right out of the stone. It was beautiful, peaceful, everything her life had never been. "There's a pool in the back," Kaelan said, not looking at her, focused on building up the fire with wood that sat stacked nearby. "Fed by an underground spring. The water's warm, clean. You should," he paused, his hands stilling on the wood. "You're injured. You should tend to your wounds before they get worse." Lunara looked down at herself and realized he was right. She'd been running on adrenaline and shock, too overwhelmed to register the full extent of the damage. But now, in the safety of the shrine with the immediate danger past, her body was catching up. The cuts across her ribs burned, her ankle throbbed where she'd twisted it during the fall, and bruises were blooming across her arms and legs in deep purple shadows. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to slow her down if left untreated. "I don't have," she gestured vaguely at herself, at her torn and filthy dress, at the complete absence of supplies or medicine or anything useful. "There are clothes," Kaelan interrupted gently, finally looking at her. "And salves, bandages. Everything you need. I prepared for your arrival." Of course he had. Because he'd dreamed about her, had known he would find her, had probably known exactly what state she'd be in when he did. The thought should have unsettled her, this stranger knowing so much about her life, her pain, her circumstances. Instead, she just felt tired. Too exhausted to be suspicious, too wrung out to maintain the defensive walls she'd spent years constructing. "Thank you," she said quietly, and meant it more than he could possibly know. He nodded once, sharp, then turned his attention back to the fire. "Take your time. We're not going anywhere tonight." She moved toward the back of the shrine on legs that trembled with fatigue, her fingers trailing along the carved walls as she went. The stone was warm beneath her touch, almost alive, and more than once she could have sworn the carved wolves moved, just a flicker, just a shift of shadow, but enough to make her breath catch. Old magic. Real magic. The kind she'd only heard about in stories, in the tales Elder Morna used to whisper before the pack had forbidden such talk. The pool was exactly where Kaelan had said it would be, tucked into an alcove that felt private despite being open to the main chamber. Steam rose from the water's surface in lazy spirals, and beside it sat a small wooden chest that, when she opened it, revealed exactly what he'd promised: clean clothes folded neatly, glass jars of salve that smelled of herbs she couldn't name, strips of linen for bandaging, even a bar of soap that released the scent of lavender when she lifted it to her nose. He'd thought of everything. Had prepared for her with a care that made her throat tight, made her chest ache with emotions she didn't have names for. No one had ever taken care of her like this. No one had ever anticipated her needs, provided for her comfort, treated her like someone worth the effort. She stripped out of her ruined dress with shaking hands, letting the wet fabric fall to the stone floor with a soft slap. For a moment she stood naked in the silver glow of the shrine, and instead of feeling exposed or vulnerable, she felt seen. Not in the way the pack had seen her, as something to mock or pity or destroy, but in the way the stone itself seemed to see her. As if the shrine recognized what she was, what she carried, and deemed her worthy of its protection. The water embraced her like a lover when she stepped in, so perfectly warm that she moaned softly, her muscles relaxing for the first time in hours. Days. Years, maybe. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been warm all the way through, couldn't remember the last time she'd felt safe enough to let her guard down even a fraction. She sank deeper, submerging herself completely, and underwater everything was muffled and soft. She could hear her own heartbeat, steady and strong despite everything. Could feel the current of her own blood moving through her veins, and beneath it, alongside it, that other current. The one that had been there her entire life. The power Kaelan said was her birthright, her inheritance, her truth. Silver fire, he'd called it. She surfaced slowly, water streaming from her hair, and found herself staring at her own reflection in the pool's surface. The girl looking back at her was a stranger. Too thin, all sharp angles and hollow spaces where softness should have been. Hair the color of storm clouds, long and tangled, falling past her shoulders in wet ropes. Eyes that were neither blue nor gray but something in between, like morning mist over the ocean she'd seen once in a book. And her skin, pale as moonlight, was marked with scars, some old and silvered, some fresh and angry red. A map of survival. A record of every time she'd gotten back up. She looked broken, but she was here. Still breathing. Still fighting. Still hoping, despite knowing better. The memories came without permission, the way they always did. She'd learned long ago that she couldn't control when the past decided to visit, could only endure it and wait for it to pass. She was 5 years old and standing in the packhouse common room while Elder Rorik examined her neck, his fingers rough and cold against her skin. Her mother had been dead 3 months. No one had wanted to take her in, but pack law said orphaned pups couldn't be turned out until they were old enough to survive on their own. So they'd kept her, but only barely. Only enough to satisfy the moon's judgment. Asterisk, asterisk. No, Mark, Rorik had said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room where pack members had gathered to witness. The girl is mateless. Cursed by her mother's weakness. The word had spread like poison through the gathering. Cursed. Mateless. Wrong. She'd been too young to understand what it meant, had only known that the way they looked at her changed. Went from indifference to disgust. From tolerance to hostility. Asterisk, asterisk. She'd spent that night locked in a storage closet because no one wanted her sleeping near the other children. had cried herself to sleep on a pile of old blankets, small and alone, and wondering why the moon hated her so much. Asterisk, asterisk. Lunara closed her eyes against the memory, but it just made the next one come faster. 8 years old. In the schooling room where the Pax Young learned their letters and numbers and histories. She'd always been good with learning, had devoured every book Elder Morna snuck to her, had memorized stories and poems and facts like they were treasures. That day they'd been discussing mate bonds, and the teacher, a sharp-faced woman named Vera, had called on her. Asterisk, asterisk. Tell us, Lunara. What does the mate bond feel like? The question had been a trap. Everyone knew she wouldn't know. Couldn't know. Would never know. Asterisk, asterisk. I can't, she'd stammered, her face burning with shame. Asterisk, asterisk. That's right, Vera had said, her voice sticky sweet with false sympathy. You can't. Because the moon deemed you unworthy of her greatest gift. Let this be a lesson to all of you. Mateless wolves are defective. Broken. They exist only to remind us what happens when bloodlines grow weak. The other children had stared at her with a mixture of pity and revulsion. And she learned that day that knowledge meant nothing if you were born without a mark. That intelligence was wasted on someone cursed. That she could be the smartest person in the room and still be worth less than nothing. Asterisk, asterisk. The water had grown cool around her without her noticing. She opened her eyes and realized tears were streaming down her face again, mixing with the spring water, salt meeting fresh. How many tears had she cried over the years? How much of herself had she poured out in silent, private grief? 12 years old. Her wolf had finally emerged for the first time, small and gray and unremarkable. She'd been so excited, so hopeful that maybe this would change things. That maybe having a wolf, even a weak one, would prove she belonged. Asterisk, asterisk. She'd shifted in the woods behind the pack house, had run on 4 legs for the first time, had felt the joy of it singing through her blood. For 10 perfect minutes, she'd been free. Wild. Whole. Asterisk, asterisk. Then Breck and his friends had found her. Had shifted too, their wolves massive and powerful compared to her slight frame. Had chased her, snapping at her heels, herding her toward the cliffs at the territory border. She'd been terrified they'd force her over, had scrambled away at the last second and hidden in a thorn bush while they circled and laughed. Asterisk, asterisk. When she'd finally made it back to the packhouse hours later, torn and bleeding and traumatized, Elder Rorik had beaten her for wandering outside safe boundaries. Had told her that mateless wolves didn't have the right to explore, to run, to experience the freedom that marked wolves took for granted. Asterisk, asterisk. She'd barely shifted after that. Hadn't seen the point when it only brought pain. Asterisk, asterisk. Lunara forced herself to move, to finish washing, to tend to her wounds with the salve Kaelan had provided. The medicine stung at first, then numbed, then eased into a gentle warmth that reminded her of the heat in her chest. She bandaged what she could reach, wrapped her ribs carefully, bound her ankle to support the strain. When she was done, when she'd dressed in the clothes he'd left, soft leggings and a tunic that fit perfectly, as if they'd been made for her, she felt almost human again. Almost whole. But the memories weren't finished with her yet. 15 years old. The year she'd nearly died. There had been a male, Garrett, who'd decided that mateless meant available. That a girl without a bond was fair game for anyone who wanted her. He'd cornered her in the smokehouse where she'd been working, had put his hands on her despite her protests, had said things that still made her skin crawl when she remembered them. Asterisk, asterisk. She'd fought. Had clawed and kicked and screamed. And that thing inside her, that power she'd felt flickering her whole life, had surged for the first time with real force. Her hands had grown hot, so hot that when she'd shoved him away, he'd yelped and stumbled back, staring at the burns on his chest where her palms had pressed. Asterisk, asterisk. For a moment she'd felt powerful. Victorious. Asterisk, asterisk. Then he'd told the elders she'd tried to kill him. That she'd used dark magic, forbidden magic, the kind that marked her as truly cursed. They'd beaten her until she couldn't stand, had locked her in the underground cellar for a week with no food and barely any water. And when they'd finally let her out, they'd made it clear that if she ever used that power again, they wouldn't stop at beating, asterisk asterisk. They'd kill her, asterisk asterisk. So she'd buried it deeper. Had wrapped it in chains of fear and denial and forced it down so far that sometimes she could almost convince herself it didn't exist. That she was exactly what they said she was. Powerless, worthless, nothing, asterisk asterisk. The girl in the pool's reflection stared back at her, and Lunara wondered what her mother would think if she could see her now. Would she be proud that her daughter had survived? Or disappointed that surviving was all she'd managed to do? That she'd let them make her small, quiet, invisible? That she'd believed their lies even when part of her had always known the truth? "I'm sorry," she whispered to the reflection, to the mother she'd never known, to the power she'd spent years suppressing. "I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to fight back. I'm sorry I let them win. They didn't win." She startled violently, spinning in the water to find Kaelan standing at the edge of the alcove. He'd kept his distance, was still several feet away, but his eyes were on her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. Made it impossible to look away. "You don't know what they did to me," she said, her voice breaking. "You don't know how many times I let them hurt me, how many times I could have fought back and didn't. How weak I've been. I know that you survived when they wanted you dead." He took a single step closer, his hands loose at his sides, non-threatening but present. "I know that you kept your humanity when they tried to strip it away. I know that you're sitting here right now, alive and aware and ready to learn, when by all rights you should be dead or broken beyond repair. That's not weakness, Lunara. That's strength they can't even comprehend." "It doesn't feel like strength," she admitted, her arms wrapping around herself beneath the water. "It feels like cowardice. Like I wasted 22 years being afraid." "Fear isn't weakness either." His voice was gentle but firm. "Fear kept you alive. Fear taught you caution, patience, how to read danger before it struck. Those are skills you're going to need for what comes next. So don't apologize for being afraid. Don't apologize for surviving in the only way you knew how." She wanted to believe him. Wanted to accept his words and let them rebuild something inside her that had been demolished years ago. But the shame was a living thing, coiled around her ribs, whispering that she didn't deserve kindness, didn't deserve second chances, didn't deserve him looking at her like she mattered. "Why do you care?" The question came out raw, desperate. "You're an Alpha King. You have territories to rule, wolves to command, power beyond anything I can imagine. Why does it matter to you what happens to one broken Omega?" He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, finally, he moved closer, not into the water, but kneeling at its edge so they were at eye level. So she could see every detail of his face, every scar, every shadow, every hint of emotion he usually kept so carefully controlled. "Because I've been dreaming about you for 3 months, he said quietly, intensely. "And in every dream, I feel what you feel. Your pain, your fear, your loneliness. I wake up with your emotions echoing in my chest, with your memories playing behind my eyes. I know you in ways I shouldn't, in ways that would be impossible if this was just about stopping the disturbances or fulfilling some prophecy." He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his expression. "The moon doesn't send dreams like that without reason. She doesn't bind people together, doesn't make me feel your heartbeat like it's my own, unless there's a purpose beyond politics or power. So when you ask why I care, Lunara, the honest answer is, I don't fully know. But I do. And I can't stop. And even if I wanted to, even if I tried to walk away right now, I think it would destroy something fundamental in me." The confession hung between them, heavy and honest and terrifying. Because if he felt her, if he truly carried her pain and fear and loneliness, then he'd experience things no one should have to experience. Had lived moments she'd barely survived the first time. And he was still here. Still looking at her with something in his eyes that made her chest ache, made her power surge with recognition, made her wolf keen with desperate, impossible hope. "I don't know how to be what you need me to be," she whispered. "I don't know how to be the lost heir, the one who saves everyone, the girl with silver fire. I only know how to be this. She gestured at herself, at all her scars and fears and failures. Broken. Small. Afraid. Then be that, Kaelan said simply. Be exactly who you are right now. And let me teach you how to be more. Not because you're not enough, you are, Lunara, exactly as you are, but because you deserve the chance to become everything you were meant to be. Everything they tried to prevent. He stood slowly, backing away to give her privacy again. When you're ready, come back to the fire. We should eat something, and then you need to rest. Tomorrow we begin your training. But tonight, his expression softened. Tonight, just let yourself be safe. Let yourself believe that for this one night, no one is going to hurt you. Can you do that? Could she? Could she set down the hypervigilance that had kept her alive, the constant tension that told her safety was an illusion and trust was a trap? Could she let herself rest in this sacred space with this man who claimed he felt her heartbeat like his own? She didn't know, but she wanted to try. Yes, she said, and watched something like relief cross his face. He left her then, returning to the main chamber. And Lunara stayed in the water a few moments longer, letting his words sink in, letting herself imagine, just for a heartbeat, that maybe she could be more than what they'd made her. That maybe the girl in the reflection wasn't just a record of survival, but the beginning of something new. Something powerful. Something that had been waiting 22 years to finally wake up. When Lunara finally emerged from the alcove, wrapped in clothes that fit her better than anything she'd ever owned, she found Kaelan sitting by the fire with 2 bowls of something that smelled like heaven. Her stomach cramped immediately, reminding her she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. Yesterday? The day before? Time had blurred in the chaos of running, drowning, surviving. He glanced up as she approached, his gold eyes tracking her movement with that same careful attention he'd shown since pulling her from the river. She was learning to read the subtle shifts in his expression, the slight softening around his eyes when he was pleased, the tiny tension in his jaw when he was concerned. Right now, he looked relieved. As if he'd been worried she might disappear into the water and never come back. Sit, he said, gesturing to the space across from him. Not a command, despite his obvious authority. An invitation. She sat, grateful when her protesting muscles finally got to rest, and accepted the bowl he offered. The contents were simple: stew, thick with meat and root vegetables, still steaming. Real food. Not the scraps and leftovers she usually got, not the half-molded bread or the watery broth that was all the pack deemed her worth. This was a meal meant to nourish, to sustain, to actually fill an empty stomach. The first bite made her close her eyes. Flavor exploded across her tongue, rich, savory, perfectly seasoned. She hadn't realized food could taste like this. Hadn't known that eating could be anything other than a necessity endured quickly and quietly before someone decided she didn't deserve even that. When she opened her eyes again, Kaelan was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something between satisfaction and sorrow, as if he was pleased to feed her but pained by how much the simple act affected her. When did you last eat? He asked quietly. She had to think about it. 2 days ago. Maybe 3. They gave me breakfast scraps after I finished the morning chores, but I dropped the bowl and she stopped, not wanting to relive that particular humiliation. The way Breck had kicked the spilled food into the dirt and told her mateless wolves didn't deserve meals they couldn't hold on to. Kaelan's jaw tightened, but he didn't comment. Just gestured for her to keep eating, and she did, trying not to shovel it in like an animal despite the gnawing hunger that demanded she finish it as quickly as possible before someone took it away. They ate in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them, the shrine's ancient magic humming in the background like a lullaby. Lunara found herself relaxing incrementally, her shoulders dropping from around her ears, her breathing deepening, her constant vigilance easing just slightly. The wards Kaelan had mentioned were real. She could feel them, invisible barriers that wrapped around the shrine in layers of protection so thick that nothing with ill intent could possibly penetrate them. She was safe here. Truly, actually safe. The realization made her want to cry again, but she was so tired of tears. Tired of being the girl who broke down at every kindness, who couldn't accept help without falling apart. So instead, she focused on the food, on the warmth, on the strange, but not unpleasant sensation of being cared for. When her bowl was empty, Kaelan took it without comment and refilled it from the pot hanging over the fire. She started to protest. She'd already had more than she usually got in a week, but he fixed her with a look that silenced the objection before it fully formed. "You're malnourished," he said bluntly. "Your body has been surviving on nothing for so long that it's forgotten what thriving feels like. One meal isn't going to fix that, but it's a start. Eat." So she ate. And when that bowl was empty too, when her stomach was fuller than it had been in years, she finally set it aside and allowed herself to just sit. To exist in this moment without worrying about the next task, the next punishment, the next threat. "Tell me about the prophecy," she said after a while, when the silence had stretched long enough that she felt brave enough to break it. "You said my ancestor fractured the barriers intentionally. Why? What was she trying to achieve?" Kaelan leaned back against the stone wall, the firelight casting shadows across his features, making him look ancient and young all at once. Like he belonged to this shrine, to this old magic, in ways that modern wolves couldn't claim. "Your ancestor, her name was Astoria Silvercrest, was the moon's chosen during a time of great upheaval," he began, his voice taking on the cadence of someone reciting history, telling a story that mattered. "The packs were at war, territories fracturing, wolves turning on each other over power and resources. Thousands were dying. The land itself was suffering, poisoned by violence and hatred." He paused, staring into the fire as if seeing those ancient battles play out in the flames. Astoria had a gift that no other wolf possessed. She could speak directly to the moon, could channel her power through her own body, could reshape reality with nothing but will and intention. The moon blessed her with this gift specifically to stop the wars, to heal the divisions, to remind wolves what they were supposed to be. "And did she?" Lunara asked quietly. "Stop the wars." "She tried." His voice carried a weight that spoke of tragedy. "She created the barrier system, invisible walls between territories that prevented violence from crossing over, that forced packs to solve their own problems without dragging everyone into conflict. She wove magic into the land itself, making certain places sacred, untouchable, safe havens where no blood could be shed. She even established the councils, the systems of law and order that most territories still follow today." He looked at her then, his gold eyes reflecting the fire's silver-blue flames. "For a generation, it worked. Peace held. Wolves remembered how to coexist, how to honor the moon's wishes, how to be something other than violent. But peace made people comfortable. And comfortable people forget. They started seeing the barriers as restrictions instead of protections. Started viewing Astoria's laws as chains instead of freedom. And eventually, they decided they wanted their old ways back." Lunara could see where this was going. Could feel it in her bones, in that place where her power lived. "They killed her. They tried." Kaelan's expression hardened. "Multiple times. But you can't easily kill someone who carries the moon's blessing, who can reshape reality with a thought. So instead they went after her family. Her mate first, ambushed him during what was supposed to be a peace summit. Then her children, one by one, hunted down and slaughtered while she watched the bloodline that carried her gift die out." His hands clenched into fists against his thighs, and Lunara realized he wasn't just reciting history. He was angry about it. Personally, viscerally angry, as if these centuries-old crimes had happened yesterday. By the time they came for her last daughter, your great-great-grandmother, Astoria had nothing left to lose. So she made a choice. She shattered the barriers she'd created, scattered her power across the realm in pieces so small that no one could collect them all, and wove a prophecy into the fabric of the land itself. He leaned forward, the intensity of his gaze pinning her in place. She prophesied that one day, when the realm needed it most, when the barriers had weakened enough that collapse was imminent, a daughter of her line would be born. A girl who carried all the scattered pieces within her blood, who could reunite the power and repair what was broken. But this girl would be hidden, protected by the moon herself, marked by absence rather than presence. marked by absence. Lunara's hand went automatically to her neck, to the place where a mate mark should have been. Where every other wolf had proof of their bond, their belonging, their purpose. The mateless mark isn't an absence, Kaelan continued, watching her touch her neck. It's a concealment. Your mother wrapped you in magic so complete that even the moon's traditional signs couldn't show through. She made you invisible to those who would hunt you, made you seem worthless to those who would destroy you. She saved your life by making everyone believe you were nothing. The words settled into her chest, heavy and painful and somehow liberating all at once. Nothing she'd endured had been random. The cruelty, the isolation, the constant reinforcement that she was broken, all of it had been necessary. All of it had kept her alive long enough to reach this moment, this shrine, this man who dreamed about her and searched until he found her. But the prophecy didn't end there, Kaelan said, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. Astoria knew her heir would need help. Would need someone to guide her, to protect her, to stand beside her when the realm's enemies came hunting. So she wove a second part into the prophecy. She declared that the moon would send a guardian, a wolf strong enough to shield the heir, loyal enough to never betray her, and bound to her so deeply that her death would mean his own. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fire seemed to still, the flames freezing mid-dance as the weight of his words pressed down on them both. You, Lunara whispered. The dreams. The way you feel what I feel. You're bound to you, he confirmed, and there was no hesitation in his voice. No uncertainty. From the moment I had the first dream, I knew. The moon marked me as your guardian 3 months ago, and everything I've done since then has been in service of finding you, protecting you, preparing you for what's coming. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think past the enormity of what he was saying. An Alpha King, bound to her. Not as her mate, he'd been careful not to use that word, and she understood why. Mate bonds were sacred, permanent, chosen by the moon with clear marks to prove them. But this was something else. Something older, deeper, more complicated than a simple mate bond. This was destiny. Purpose. A connection forged by ancient magic and prophetic will. I don't want you to die for me, she said, her voice shaking. I don't want anyone to. I'm not worth. Stop. The command was gentle but absolute. You are worth everything Astoria sacrificed. Everything your mother gave up. Everything I've pledged. And you're going to learn that, Lunara. You're going to learn your value, your power, your truth. Even if I have to remind you every single day until you believe it. He stood then, moving away from the fire toward the carved walls. His fingers traced one of the symbols, a crescent moon wrapped around a flame, and it flared to life beneath his touch, glowing brighter than the others. This shrine was built by Astoria herself, he said, still facing the wall. It's one of the only places in the realm where her magic is still pure, still untouched by time or corruption. And it recognized you the moment you stepped inside. Did you feel it? The way it welcomed you. She had. She'd thought she was imagining it, attributing meaning to something that was just old stone and older magic. But no, the shrine had known her. Had called to something in her blood, in her power, in her soul. Tomorrow, I'm going to teach you how to access that welcome, Kaelan continued, turning back to face her. How to speak to the magic here, how to let it show you what you are. But tonight, there's something you need to see. Something that will help you understand what we're facing. He gestured for her to follow him, and on legs that felt unsteady, she did. He led her to the far wall, to a section she hadn't examined closely before. The carvings here were different from the others, not wolves or people, but scenes. Stories told in stone, each one flowing into the next in a continuous narrative. This is the history Astoria carved herself, Kaelan said, his hand hovering over the first panel. The true history, not the sanitized version the councils teach. Watch. He pressed his palm flat against the stone, and the world exploded into light. Lunara gasped as the shrine around them dissolved, replaced by vision, not just images, but full immersive memory. She was standing in a forest clearing, but it wasn't empty. Hundreds of wolves surrounded her, their forms shifting between human and beast, their voices raised in anger and accusation. And in the center, standing alone, was a woman who could only be Astoria. She was beautiful in the way storms were beautiful, wild, powerful, impossible to ignore. Her hair was silver, not with age but with magic, and her eyes burned with the same silver fire that Lunara felt in her own chest. She wore a simple dress, but power radiated from her invisible waves, distorting the air around her like heat rising from sun-baked stone. "You call me tyrant," Astoria's voice rang out, clear and strong and utterly unafraid. "You say my barriers imprison you, that my laws restrict your freedom. But what you call tyranny, I call survival. What you call chains, I call the only thing standing between you and extinction." The wolves snarled, pressed closer. A male, tall, scarred, radiating authority, stepped forward. An alpha, Lunara realized. Maybe several alphas combined. "We don't need your protection," he spat. "We don't need the moon's chosen interfering in pack business. You've made us weak, Silvercrest. Made us forget how to fight, how to take what's ours, how to be wolves instead of your pets." "I've made you survive," Astoria corrected coldly. "I've given you 30 years without war, without the kind of slaughter that nearly destroyed every pack in existence. But if you want to return to that, if you want to paint the forests red again, then by all means. Kill me. Tear down the barriers. See how long your packs last when there's no one to stop you from destroying each other." The alpha's smile was vicious. "That's exactly what we intend to do." The vision shifted, jumped forward. Now Astoria was older, her silver hair dimmed, her face lined with grief. She was kneeling beside a body, a male, his throat torn out, his eyes staring sightless at the sky. Her mate, Lunara knew instinctively. Her mate was dead. "They took him from me," Astoria whispered to someone Lunara couldn't see. "They ambushed the peace summit, slaughtered everyone who supported the barriers, and left his body where I would find it. This is their message. This is their declaration." Another shift. Astoria was standing in a burning village, children screaming, wolves fighting in the streets. Her power lashed out, silver fire consuming everything it touched, stopping the violence through sheer overwhelming force. But when the flames died, the survivors looked at her with fear, with hatred, with the certainty that she was the monster, not the ones who'd started the killing. Again the vision changed. Astoria was younger now. No, Lunara realized, this was someone else. Her daughter, maybe, or granddaughter. The same silver hair, the same burning eyes, but smaller, more fragile. And surrounding her were wolves with weapons, with magic of their own, with the clear intent to end this bloodline once and for all. "Please," the girl begged. "I'm not my mother. I'm not trying to control you. I just want to live." "Then you should have been born to a different line," someone said, and struck. The vision jumped again and again. Generations compressed into moments, each one showing a daughter of Silvercrest hunted, killed, erased. Until finally there was only one left. A woman who looked so much like Lunara that it stole her breath. Her grandmother, she realized. The one who'd fled, who'd hidden, who'd survived just long enough to pass the bloodline forward one more time. She was running through a forest, heavily pregnant, wolves at her heels. She was cornered against a cliff, hands raised in supplication. She was fighting, silver fire bursting from her palms, taking down 3 wolves before more overwhelmed her. She was dying, blood pooling beneath her, but still she was speaking no, chanting. Weaving magic with her last breath, wrapping her unborn daughter in protection so complete that nothing would ever find her. Nothing except the one the moon sent specifically to look. The vision released Lunara with a gasp, and she found herself back in the shrine, on her knees, tears streaming down her face. Kaelan was beside her immediately, his hand on her shoulder, steady and grounding. "That's what they did to your bloodline," he said quietly. "That's why Astoria shattered the barriers, not out of spite, but as a final protection. She knew if she left them intact, whoever killed her line would just take control of them, would use her own magic to enslave everyone. So she scattered it. Made it impossible to claim unless the true heir returned." Lunara couldn't speak, could barely breathe past the grief and rage and horror of what she'd witnessed. generations of her family, hunted and slaughtered. Women who'd done nothing except be born to the wrong line, carry the wrong gift. Her grandmother, dying in a forest just like the one Lunara had fled through tonight, fighting to save a daughter she'd never meet. They were brave, she finally managed, her voice wrecked. All of them. They were so brave. They were, Kaelan agreed. And you carry their courage in your blood, Lunara. You carry their power, their determination, their refusal to be erased. That's what the realm is afraid of. Not that you'll be weak, but that you'll be strong. That you'll reclaim everything they tried to destroy and use it to hold them accountable. He helped her to her feet, his hands gentle but sure. The disturbances are accelerating because the barriers are almost completely gone. Without them, the territories are bleeding into each other, physically, magically, spiritually. Shadow creatures that should be trapped in their own realm are crossing over. Old battlegrounds are waking up, replaying their violence on anyone unfortunate enough to wander through them. Weather patterns are fracturing, seasons are happening out of order, and if we don't stop it soon, if we don't help you reclaim your power and repair the barriers, the entire realm will collapse into chaos. The weight of it was crushing. The entire realm, depending on her. A girl who'd spent her life being told she was worthless, suddenly responsible for saving everyone. "I can't do this," she whispered. I don't know how." "You can." Kaelan's voice was absolute, unshakable. "You already survived the impossible. You already carry power that most wolves can't even imagine. And you're not alone in this. I'm bound to you, Lunara. Your success is my success. Your survival is my survival. Whatever it takes to help you reclaim your birthright and repair the barriers, I will do it. Even if it costs me everything." She looked up at him, at this legendary Alpha King who'd searched across territories to find her, who felt her pain like his own, who'd pledged his life to her protection. His gold eyes were steady, honest, holding nothing back. And in them she saw something that made her breath catch. Faith. He had faith in her. This man who commanded armies, who ruled vast territories, who carried power that made other alphas kneel, he believed she could do this. Believed she was exactly what the prophecy promised. Maybe, just maybe, she could believe it too. "Show me," she said, her voice stronger now. "Tomorrow. Show me how to access my power. How to speak to the magic. How to become who I'm supposed to be." His expression shifted into something that was almost a smile, warm and proud and achingly gentle. "I will. But tonight, you need to rest. Real rest, without fear or pain or nightmares. The shrine will protect you while you sleep, and I'll be right here. I promise, Lunara. Nothing will touch you while I draw breath." And somehow, impossibly, she believed him. He guided her to a pallet he'd prepared, soft furs and blankets piled deep enough to sink into, positioned close enough to the fire for warmth, but far enough that the heat wouldn't be uncomfortable. She lay down carefully, her body protesting every movement despite the pool's healing properties, and let him cover her with another blanket. "Sleep," he murmured, settling himself against the wall nearby, close enough to guard but far enough to give her space. "Tomorrow, everything changes." Lunara closed her eyes, expecting sleep to be impossible despite her exhaustion. Expected nightmares of running wolves and drowning rivers and generations of murdered women to chase her into consciousness. But the shrine's magic wrapped around her like a second blanket, warm and safe and impossibly gentle. And beneath that, she felt something else, a presence that wasn't her own but wasn't quite separate either. Kaelan. His consciousness brushing against hers, keeping watch, keeping her safe, keeping the darkness at bay. For the first time in her entire life, Lunara fell asleep without fear. And she dreamed of silver fire. Morning came softly. Not with violence or cold water thrown in her face or harsh voices demanding she get up and start her chores. Just gentle light filtering through the shrine's entrance, the warm glow of embers still burning in the fire pit, and the quiet sound of someone moving carefully, trying not to wake her. Lunara opened her eyes slowly, momentarily disoriented by the absence of fear. She'd grown so accustomed to waking in dread, wondering what fresh horror the day would bring, which pack member would decide she needed reminding of her place, how much pain she'd have to endure before darkness came again. That waking peacefully felt wrong. Dangerous, even. Like the calm before a storm. Then memory flooded back. The hunt. The fall. The river. Kaelan pulling her from the water, bringing her to this sacred place, telling her everything she thought she knew about herself was a lie wrapped in protection. She sat up carefully, her muscles stiff, but significantly better than they had any right to be. The injuries that should have taken weeks to heal felt days old instead, the pain muted to distant aches rather than sharp agony. The shrine's magic, probably. Or maybe her own power, finally allowed to work without constant suppression holding it back. Kaelan was across the chamber, his back to her, doing something she couldn't quite see. He'd changed clothes, still simple, still practical, but clean. His dark hair was damp, suggesting he'd bathed at some point while she slept, and even from this distance she could see the tension in his shoulders. He was worried about something. Planning something. Preparing for whatever came next. "You're awake." He didn't turn around, but his voice carried easily across the space. "How do you feel?" She considered the question honestly. "Better than I should. Better than I've felt in years, actually. The shrine recognizes you as a story as heir. It's been healing you while you slept, repairing damage that goes back far longer than last night's injuries." Now he did turn, and his gold eyes swept over her with an assessing gaze that was clinical rather than invasive. "You were malnourished, dehydrated, carrying old wounds that never healed properly. The magic here has been working on all of it." Lunara looked down at her arms, at skin that seemed clearer than before, at scars that had faded to almost nothing. Even her hands, usually rough and cracked from endless labor, looked smooth. Whole. Like they belonged to someone who'd been cared for rather than used up. "I made food," Kaelan continued, gesturing to a small pot hanging over the fire. "Nothing elaborate, but you need to keep eating. Your body has a lot of recovery to do, and training will tax you further." Training. Right. Today was supposed to be the day she learned to access her power, to speak to the ancient magic, to become something more than the frightened girl who'd run from wolves in the dark. The thought terrified her. She stood, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders against the morning chill, and moved to join him by the fire. He handed her a bowl without comment, more stew, this time with chunks of bread to soak up the broth, and she ate standing up, too nervous to sit, too restless to stay still. "How does this work?" she asked between bites. "The training. Do I just try to make fire appear? Think really hard about power until something happens?" His mouth quirked slightly, not quite a smile but close. "Nothing so dramatic. First, you need to understand what your power actually is. Most wolves think of magic as something external, something you reach for, grab, force into submission. But bloodline magic like yours doesn't work that way. It's not external. It's you. Part of your essence, woven into every cell, every breath. You don't call it. You release it." He set his own bowl aside and moved to the center of the shrine, to a space where the carved floor formed a perfect circle inlaid with silver that caught the morning light. "Come here. Stand in the center." Lunara finished her food quickly and did as he asked, stepping into the circle with trepidation. The moment her bare feet touched the silver lines, she felt it, a hum that resonated in her bones, a frequency that matched the pulse in her chest. The shrine was responding to her presence, recognizing her, welcoming her. "Close your eyes," Kaelan instructed, his voice dropping into something lower, almost hypnotic. "Breathe. Just breathe, and feel what's happening in your body." She obeyed, letting her eyes drift shut, focusing on the steady rhythm of her lungs expanding and contracting. In, out, in, out. Simple. Grounding. "Now go deeper," he continued. "Past your breath. Past your heartbeat. Find that place in your chest where the warmth lives. The heat you've felt your whole life but never understood. The warmth." Yes. She knew exactly what he meant. That constant presence, that ember that flared when she was afraid or angry or desperate. She'd spent so long trying to smother it, to pretend it didn't exist, that actively seeking it out felt like approaching a wild animal. Dangerous. Unpredictable. But she reached for it anyway, let her consciousness sink inward until she found that glowing coal nestled beneath her sternum. And the moment she acknowledged it, the moment she stopped running from it, it surged. Heat flooded through her veins, not painful but intense, and she gasped. Her eyes flew open to find Kaelan watching her intently, his expression unreadable. "What do you see?" he asked quietly. She looked down at her hands and froze. They were glowing. Faintly, barely visible in the morning light, but definitely glowing. Silver light pulsed beneath her skin, tracing her veins, making her look like she was made of moonlight and magic rather than flesh and bone. "That's your power," Kaelan said, moving closer but not touching, giving her space to process. "That's what they were so afraid of. What your mother hid, what Astoria wielded, what the realm needs you to reclaim." The glow was beautiful. Terrifying. Proof that everything he'd told her was true, that she wasn't broken or cursed or worthless. She was exactly what she was supposed to be. Then the shrine's entrance exploded inward. The blast of force sent Lunara stumbling backward, the glow in her hands flickering and dying as shock replaced concentration. Kaelan was in front of her instantly, his body a shield, his own power flooding the space in a wave that made the air crackle with electricity. Through the settling dust, figures emerged. 5 of them, all in wolf form, all radiating hostile intent. And leading them, russet fur dark with morning dew, yellow eyes fixed on Lunara with murderous focus. "Breck. Found you," he snarled, his voice distorted by his shifted form, but still recognizable. "Thought you could run? Thought you could hide with some foreign alpha and we wouldn't track you down." Kaelan's growl was a sound that made the shrine stones vibrate, made the ancient magic recoil, and then surge forward in defense of its heir. "You dare bring violence to sacred ground? You dare threaten what is under my protection? Your protection means nothing here, outsider." Breck took a step forward, and the 4 wolves with him fanned out, surrounding the entrance. "This is pack business. The girl is ours. She was born in our territory, raised in our pack, and she'll die by our justice." "Justice?" Lunara's voice came out stronger than she expected, loud enough to echo off the shrine's walls. She stepped out from behind Kaelan despite his immediate attempt to keep her shielded. "You call hunting me for sport justice? You call trying to murder me because you're afraid of a prophecy you don't even understand, that's justice?" Breck's lips pulled back, showing too many teeth. "You're cursed. Mateless. Wrong. And now we know why, your Silvercrest spawn. Descended from the tyrant who tried to chain us all. The elders were right to fear you. Right to want you dead before your power wakes and destroys us all." "Her power is already waking," Kaelan said coldly, and Lunara felt him reaching back, his hand finding hers, squeezing once. She didn't understand what he was trying to communicate until she felt it. His power flowing into her, not taking over but supporting, showing her how to access what she'd just touched, how to let it rise without fear. The glow returned to her hands, stronger this time, and Breck's eyes widened. "You see," Kaelan continued, his voice carrying absolute authority. "You're already too late. She's already remembering what she is. And if you're smart, you'll leave now, return to your pack, and tell them that Lunara Silvercrest is under the protection of the Northern Territories. Tell them that anyone who comes for her will answer to me." For a moment, Lunara thought it might work. Thought Breck might actually back down, might recognize the danger of challenging an Alpha King on sacred ground with ancient magic rising in defense. Then one of the other wolves, Jorah, she realized laughed. Sharp and vicious and utterly without fear. "You think we came here alone?" Jorah's voice was female, cutting. "You think we didn't plan for the possibility that she'd have help? Elder Rorik is already gathering the full pack. They'll be here within the hour, and then we'll see how well your protection holds against 50 wolves with a righteous cause." 50 wolves. The number hit Lunara like a physical blow. Even if half of them didn't actually want to kill her. Even if some of them were just following orders, just too afraid of the elders to object, that was still an overwhelming force. And Kaelan was just one man, however powerful. He couldn't fight an entire pack alone. Lunara. Kaelan's voice was quiet, meant only for her. Listen to me carefully. When I give the signal, I need you to run. There's a passage at the back of the shrine, behind the pool. It leads deeper into the mountain, to tunnels that will take you miles from here. Follow them until you reach daylight, then head north. Don't stop, don't look back, just run. No, the refusal was immediate, instinctive. I'm not leaving you to fight them alone. I'm not. You are. His hand tightened on hers, almost painful. Because if they take you, if they kill you before you fully claim your power, the barriers will never be repaired. The realm will fall. Everything Astoria sacrificed, everything your mother died protecting, it will all be for nothing. Your life is worth more than mine, Lunara. Accept that. Your life is bound to mine. The words burst out of her, desperate and raw. You said it yourself, if I die, you die. So if I run and they kill you trying to stop them, I die anyway. There's no version of this where abandoning you keeps me safe. She'd surprised him. She could see it in the slight widening of his eyes, the momentary break in his composure. As if he'd somehow forgotten that detail, or thought she wouldn't care, wouldn't fight for his life the way he was clearly prepared to fight for hers. Breck was watching them with growing impatience, his body coiled and ready to lunge. Touching. Really. But your little romantic moment doesn't change anything. You're both dead the second the pack arrives. Although his yellow eyes gleamed with malicious intelligence. If you hand her over now, outsider, I'll speak to the elders on your behalf. Tell them you were deceived, manipulated by her cursed blood. They might let you leave with your life. I'd sooner tear out my own throat, Kaelan said flatly, than betray someone under my protection. And if your elders are so eager to spill blood on sacred ground, so willing to violate the moon's oldest laws, then they deserve what's coming. Which is? Breck challenged. Me. The word was simple. Absolute. And accompanied by a surge of power so intense that all 5 wolves stumbled backward, whimpering, their tails dropping in automatic submission. I am Kaelan, Alpha King of the Northern Territories. I have commanded armies, ended wars, brought rogue packs to heel with nothing but the force of my will. And you, he took a single step forward, and the wolves retreated further. You are nothing. Weaklings following weaker leaders, too frightened of change to see that the girl you're hunting is the only thing standing between your pack and annihilation. The display of dominance was overwhelming. Lunara felt it herself, the raw power that rolled off Kaelan in waves, the undeniable authority that marked him as exactly what he claimed to be. This wasn't just an alpha. This was the alpha, the one other alphas measured themselves against and found wanting. But Breck, either braver or more foolish than his companions, held his ground. Pretty words. Impressive power. But it's 5 against 1 right now and 50 against 1 soon enough. You can't protect her forever. Eventually, you'll slip. Eventually, we'll get through. And when we do... He never finished the threat. Because Lunara, standing in the center of the circle with Kaelan's power flowing through their joined hands and her own power finally responding to her will instead of her fear, did something she'd never done before. She let go. The silver fire that had been glowing beneath her skin erupted outward in a blast of light that turned the shrine's dim interior into blazing noon. It wasn't controlled, wasn't directed, just pure power released after 22 years of suppression. The wolves yelped and scattered, their forms hitting the walls with impacts that should have broken bones. The shrine itself seemed to sing, its ancient magic recognizing its air and amplifying her power, sending it cascading through the carved walls until every symbol, every figure, every piece of Astoria's legacy was glowing with the same silver light. Lunara stood at the center of it all, her hair whipping around her face from winds that shouldn't exist indoors, her hands burning with fire that didn't consume, her eyes, she could feel them, blazing with the same light that now filled the entire space. And she wasn't afraid. For the first time in her life, standing in her power rather than cowering from it, she felt right. Whole. Like every missing piece had suddenly clicked into place and shown her what she'd been meant to be all along. Leave. Her voice echoed strangely, layered with something that wasn't quite her own. The shrine speaking through her, maybe. Or Astoria's magic, recognizing a worthy vessel. Leave now and tell your pack that I am done running. Tell them that I am Lunara Silvercrest, last heir of the moon's chosen, and I will not be hunted anymore. Tell them that the next wolf who comes for me will face the full weight of my power. And trust me, the fire in her hands pulsed brighter. They don't want that. Breck was on his feet, his fur singed, his eyes wide with something that looked dangerously close to fear. The other wolves were already backing toward the entrance, clearly done with this fight, clearly understanding that they'd underestimated exactly what they were facing. This isn't over, Breck managed, but his voice lacked conviction. The elders won't stop. They can't. You're too dangerous to let live. Then they'll die trying. Kaelan spoke from beside her, his hand still clasped in hers, his power still flowing to support rather than dominate. And so will anyone else who threatens her. Spread that message too. For a long moment, the wolves just stared. Then, finally, Breck turned and fled, his companions close behind, their forms disappearing into the forest beyond the shrine's entrance. The silence they left behind was deafening. Lunara stood frozen, staring at her hands, at the silver fire that was only now beginning to fade. She'd done that. She'd released her power without it flickering and dying, without it turning on her or making things worse. She'd defended herself, protected herself, shown them she wasn't prey anymore. Lunara. Kaelan's voice was gentle, grounding. You need to breathe. Let it go now. Let the power settle back. She tried. Closed her eyes and reached for that ember in her chest, tried to coax the fire back into containment. But it resisted, wild now that it had finally been released, eager to burn brighter, to consume everything in reach. Panic spiked through her. I can't, it won't. Yes, you can. His other hand came up to cup her face, forcing her to focus on him rather than the chaos of her own power. You're in control, Lunara. It obeys you, not the other way around. Tell it to rest. Command it. She met his gold eyes, found them steady and sure and absolutely confident in her ability to do this. And somehow that confidence transferred. She took a breath, then another, and whispered to the fire inside her the way she might to a frightened animal. Rest. Please. I need you to rest. Asterisk. The power listened. Slowly, reluctantly, but it listened. The silver light faded from her hands, from her eyes, from the shrine walls. The wind died. The temperature normalized. And Lunara was just herself again, exhausted, shaking, but alive. She collapsed forward and Kaelan caught her, his arms coming around her in a hold that was more support than embrace. You did it, he murmured against her hair. You accessed your power, you controlled it long enough to drive them away, and you brought it back under control. That's more than most bloodline magic users manage in their first year of training. I don't feel victorious, she admitted, her face pressed against his shoulder. I feel terrified. They're coming back, Kaelan. Breck said the whole pack. I know. His arms tightened. And we can't stay here. The shrine will protect us from direct assault, but they could wait us out, starve us into surrender. We need to leave. Head north to my territory where I have resources, allies, an army if necessary. Leave. Run again. The thought made her want to weep. She'd just started to believe this place might be safe, might be somewhere she could learn and grow without fear. But of course it couldn't last. Safety never did. Not for girls like her. How long do we have? She asked. If Jorah was telling the truth? Less than an hour before they arrive in force. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his expression grim. We need to move now. Gather what you can carry, food and water for several days. The journey north will be hard, and we can't risk stopping in any territory between here and mine. Lunara nodded, forcing herself into motion despite the exhaustion that threatened to drag her down. She'd rested for one night. One night of peace in 20 years of hell. And now she was running again, fleeing into unknown territory with a man she barely knew, trusting that his protection would hold when everything in her life had taught her that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. But what choice did she have? Stay and die, or run and maybe live long enough to become what the prophecy promised? As she moved through the shrine gathering supplies, wrapping food in cloth and filling a water skin from the pool, she felt Kaelan's eyes on her. Felt his worry, his anger, his determination. The bond between them was growing stronger, she realized. She could sense his emotions now, could feel the edges of his thoughts brushing against hers. The guardian bond, doing exactly what Astoria had designed it to do, connecting them so completely that they could fight as one, think as one, survive as one. It should have terrified her. This loss of boundaries, this merging of selves. Instead, it felt like the first truly safe thing she'd ever experienced. Ready? Kaelan asked when she'd finished packing. No, she wasn't ready. Wasn't ready to leave the first safe place she'd ever known. Wasn't ready to face whatever dangers waited in the wilderness. Wasn't ready to carry the weight of a realm's survival on shoulders that had barely been strong enough to carry her own pain. But ready or not, this was happening. Yes, she lied, and followed him toward the back of the shrine, toward the passage he'd mentioned, toward an uncertain future that waited in the darkness. Behind them, in the distance, she heard it, howls rising in harmony, dozens of voices joining in a hunt song. The pack arriving exactly as threatened, coming for her with all the force of their fear and hatred and misguided righteousness. They ran. And as the shrine's light faded behind them, as they plunged into tunnels carved by ancient hands for ancient purposes, Lunara made herself a promise. She would survive this. Would learn to control her power, would grow strong enough that she never had to run again. Would become everything they feared so that one day, when she was ready, she could return. Not for revenge. She didn't want revenge. She wanted justice. She wanted them to see what they'd tried to destroy. She wanted them to know, with absolute certainty, that they'd been wrong about her from the very beginning. And she would make sure they lived long enough to regret it. The tunnels stretched on forever. At least, that's how it felt to Lunara as she followed Kaelan through passages carved so long ago that even the stone had forgotten who'd made them. The darkness was absolute except for the faint silver glow that emanated from the walls themselves, residual magic from Astoria's time, Kaelan had explained during one of their brief rest stops. The ancient wolf had built escape routes into every sacred place she'd created, knowing that one day her descendants might need them. Lunara wondered if Astoria had imagined it would take centuries for that day to come. If she'd known how completely her bloodline would be hunted, scattered, nearly erased from existence. They'd been walking for hours. Maybe longer. Time lost meaning in the perpetual twilight of the underground, marked only by the ache in Lunara's legs, the burning in her lungs, the steady rhythm of Kaelan's footsteps ahead of her. He hadn't spoken much since they'd entered the tunnels, his focus entirely on navigating the maze of passages that branched and twisted and occasionally dead-ended without warning. But she could feel him. The bond between them had grown stronger in the hours since she'd unleashed her power in the shrine, until now she could sense his emotions like they were her own. His determination, steady and unyielding. His concern, carefully controlled but present. His anger at the pack that had forced them into this flight, burning low and constant like coals that refused to die. And beneath it all, something else. Something that made her chest tight and her breath unsteady whenever she let herself examine it too closely. An awareness of her that went beyond guardian to charge, beyond protector to protected. He was attuned to her in ways that felt intimate, personal, like he was tracking not just her physical presence, but her emotional state, her fears, her hopes. Like he cared about more than just keeping her alive long enough to repair the barriers. The thought was dangerous. She couldn't afford to read too much into the bond, couldn't let herself believe it meant something it didn't. He'd told her himself, he was bound to her by prophecy, by ancient magic, by the moon's will. Not by choice. Not by desire. Just by duty to a realm that needed saving. But then why did her wolf keep pressing forward, kept insisting that what she felt from him was more than obligation? Why did every accidental brush of his hand against hers send heat racing through her veins? Why did his voice, low and careful in the darkness, make her feel safer than she'd ever felt in her entire life? "We're almost there," Kaelan said suddenly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "There's a cavern ahead where we can rest properly. Build a fire, eat something warm, let you recover from the power expenditure." Lunara wanted to argue that she was fine, that she could keep going, but the truth was she was exhausted. The burst of power in the shrine had drained her more than she'd realized, leaving her feeling hollowed out, shaky, like she'd burned through reserves she didn't know she had. And her body, despite the shrine's healing, was still recovering from years of malnutrition and abuse. She needed rest whether she wanted to admit it or not. "How much farther to your territory?" she asked instead. 3 days if we maintain this pace and don't encounter trouble." He glanced back at her, his gold eyes catching the silver glow of the tunnel walls. "But we won't maintain this pace. You need time to recover, to practice controlling your power before we surface. The journey above ground will be dangerous. We'll be crossing unclaimed lands where rogues gather, where the barrier fractures are causing the most damage. You'll need to be able to defend yourself." The reminder of what waited above, the threats, the chaos, the realm slowly tearing itself apart, made her stomach clench. But she forced herself to nod, to accept the reality she couldn't change. She was done running blindly. Done being the helpless victim who needed constant rescuing. If she was going to survive this, if she was going to become what the prophecy promised, she needed to learn fast. The tunnel opened into a cavern so suddenly that Lunara gasped. Where the passages had been narrow, claustrophobic, this space was vast, easily large enough to hold 50 wolves. The ceiling soared overhead, disappearing into shadows even the silver glow couldn't penetrate, and in the center, a natural spring bubbled up through cracks in the stone floor, creating a small pool that steamed gently in the cool air. But it was the walls that stole her breath. They were covered in carvings, just like the shrine, but these were different. More primitive, more raw. They showed wolves in their true forms. Not the half-shifted state most modern wolves used, but fully transformed, massive and powerful and utterly wild. And among them, figures that weren't quite wolf and weren't quite human, something in between that she had no name for. "What is this place?" she whispered, moving closer to examine the carvings. "A way station." Kaelan was already gathering wood from a pile stacked near the entrance. Someone had been here before, prepared the space for travelers. The tunnels were used for centuries by those fleeing persecution, by messengers carrying urgent news, by anyone who needed to travel unseen. Your ancestor built them, but others maintained them, expanded them. This cavern in particular was a meeting place for those who served the Silvercrest line. A safe haven where they could gather, plan, rest. He knelt and began building a fire with practiced efficiency, and Lunara found herself watching his hands. Strong, scarred, moving with confidence born of repetition. How many fires had he built in his life? How many camps had he made in hostile territory, alone or with warriors under his command? He carried himself like someone who'd spent more time in the wilderness than in palaces, despite being an Alpha King. "Tell me about your territory," she said, settling herself on a flat rock near where he worked. "The Northern Territories. What are they like?" He paused, glancing at her with something that might have been surprise. As if he hadn't expected her to ask, to show interest in his life beyond what directly affected hers. "Harsh," he said finally, returning to the fire. "Unforgiving. The winters are brutal, the summers short. The land doesn't give anything freely. You have to fight for every harvest, every shelter, every moment of warmth." He struck flint against steel, and sparks caught in the kindling, flames beginning to curl up through the wood. "But it's beautiful. Wild in ways that the Southern Territories have forgotten. The forests are so old that the trees remember when wolves first walked upright. The mountains touch the sky. And the northern lights," he stopped, something crossing his face. "You'd have to see them to understand." The way they dance across the darkness, green and purple and silver, like the moon herself is painting the night. There was longing in his voice, carefully hidden but present. Homesickness, maybe. Or just the natural pull of an alpha toward his land, his pack, his people. He'd been away from them for months, searching for her, and she wondered what it cost him. What responsibilities he'd left behind, what challenges were accumulating in his absence. "Do you have family there?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, too personal, too intimate for the boundaries she was supposed to maintain. But she wanted to know. Needed to know who this man was beyond the prophecy and the power and the careful control he showed her. Kaelan was quiet for a long moment, feeding the fire, watching the flames grow. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, controlled. "I had a sister, younger by 5 years. She died in the war that fractured the territories. The same conflict that eventually led to my becoming Alpha King." Lunara's chest tightened. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." But his hands had stilled on the wood, his knuckles white. "She died protecting what she believed in, fighting for a better future. And her death," he paused, seeming to weigh his words. "Her death taught me that power without purpose is just destruction. That being strong isn't enough if you're not using that strength to protect something worth saving." He looked at her then, his gold eyes intense in the firelight. "That's why I searched for you, Lunara. Not just because of prophecy or duty, but because the realm my sister died trying to save is unraveling. And you, whether you believe it or not, you're the only one who can stop it." The weight of his faith in her was crushing. She wanted to live up to it, wanted to be strong enough, brave enough, powerful enough to deserve the sacrifice his sister had made, the time he was investing, the protection he was offering. But she was just a girl who'd spent her life being told she was worthless. How was she supposed to suddenly become someone worth believing in? "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted quietly. "Earlier, in the shrine, when I released my power, I didn't control it. It just exploded out of me. What if next time I can't bring it back? What if I hurt someone? What if I hurt you?" Kaelan moved then, crossing the space between them with 2 strides and kneeling in front of her so they were eye level. His hands came up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he cupped her face with a gentleness that made her throat tight. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and intense. "You are not going to hurt me. Your power responds to intent, to will, to the emotions driving it. You released it in the shrine to defend yourself, to protect us both, and it did exactly that. It drove away the threat without harming anything except enemy wolves who meant us harm. That's not lack of control, that's instinct. Your power knows friend from foe." His thumbs brushed her cheekbones, the touch featherlight but grounding. "And yes, you're going to make mistakes as you learn. You're going to release more than you meant to, or less, or aim wrong. That's what training is for. But I promise you, I swear to you on everything I am, you are not the weapon they tried to convince you were. You're the shield. The protector. The heir to a legacy built on healing and unity, not destruction." She wanted to believe him. Wanted to let his certainty become her own, to trust that he saw her clearly when everyone else had been so blind. But fear was a habit 22 years in the making, and habits didn't break easily. "How do you know?" The question came out broken, desperate. "How do you know I'm not cursed? That this power isn't going to destroy me from the inside out? Because I feel you." His hands tightened just slightly, keeping her focused on him on this moment. "The bond between us doesn't just let me sense your emotions, Lunara. It lets me feel your essence, the core of who you are. And what I feel." He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his expression. "What I feel is light. Warmth. A goodness that survived despite everything they did to try and crush it. You're not cursed. You're blessed in ways they were too corrupted to recognize." The words settled into her chest, into that place where her power lived, and she felt something shift. Not the power itself, but her relationship to it. As if hearing someone else name it as blessing rather than curse started changing how she saw it too. "Teach me," she whispered. "Please. Teach me how to control it, how to use it, how to be what you see when you look at me." His expression softened into something that was almost a smile, warm and proud and achingly gentle. I will. Starting tonight. But first, he released her face and stood, moving to the packs they'd brought from the shrine. You need to eat. Real food, not just whatever you can grab while running. And you need rest. Your body is still recovering from decades of deprivation. The training will be hard, and I need you strong for it. He was right, of course. She could feel the exhaustion pulling at her, making her movements sluggish, her thoughts fuzzy. But part of her wanted to protest, to insist they start immediately, that she didn't need comfort or care or any of the things she'd lived without for so long. Except she did need them. And maybe learning to accept care was part of becoming someone new. Someone who valued herself enough to demand better treatment. Kaelan prepared food with the same quiet efficiency he'd shown with the fire, dried meat rehydrated in water from the spring, roots that somehow tasted sweet when roasted over the flames, bread that was dense and filling. He portioned it out carefully, giving her more than he took for himself, and when she tried to protest, he fixed her with a look that silenced the objection before it fully formed. Eat, he said simply, and she did. They ate in comfortable silence, the cavern warm now from the fire, the sound of the spring providing gentle background music. Lunara found herself relaxing incrementally, her shoulders dropping from around her ears, her breathing deepening. The food was helping, grounding her, reminding her body that it was safe, that it could stop operating in crisis mode even just for a little while. When her bowl was empty, when she'd eaten more in one sitting than she usually got in 3 days, she set it aside and found Kaelan watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing. But he didn't look away. Just trying to reconcile what I'm seeing with what I felt in the dreams. In them, you were so broken. So damaged by what they'd done that I wasn't sure there'd be anything left to save when I found you. But he paused, seeming to search for words. You're stronger than the dream showed. Braver. The girl I pulled from the river was half dead and still fighting. The woman who unleashed her power this morning did so to protect, not to destroy. You're not what they tried to make you. The praise made her uncomfortable in ways she couldn't name. She wasn't used to being seen as anything other than a burden, a problem, something to be managed or eliminated. Hearing Kaelan describe her as strong, brave, worth saving, it didn't fit with the narrative she'd been force-fed her entire life. I ran, she said, needing to contradict him, to remind him she wasn't the hero he seemed to think she was. I spent 22 years running, hiding, letting them hurt me without fighting back. That's not brave. That's survival. His voice was firm, brooking no argument. And survival is its own kind of bravery. You stayed alive when they wanted you dead. You kept your humanity when they tried to strip it away. You maintained hope when you had every reason to give up. That takes more courage than most people possess. He shifted closer, the firelight casting shadows across his features, making him look ancient and young all at once. I've commanded armies, Lunara. I've led wolves into battles where death was certain. And I can tell you with absolute confidence that standing and fighting when you have weapons, training, and allies at your back takes far less courage than surviving alone, unarmed, with no one believing you deserve to live. What you did, what you've been doing your entire life, that's true strength. The conviction in his voice made her throat tight. Made her want to believe him, to accept his assessment of her life as something other than an extended exercise in cowardice. But believing it meant reframing everything, meant acknowledging that maybe she'd been stronger than she thought all along. Tell me something, she said after a moment, needing to shift the focus away from herself. In the dreams you had about me, what did you see? What did the moon show you? Kaelan was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire, his expression distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost vulnerable. I saw you running through forests that were burning. Saw you cornered by wolves who wore your pack's insignia. Saw you drowning in black water while no one tried to save you. I felt your fear like it was my own, felt your pain every time they hit you, felt your loneliness like a physical weight in my chest. He looked at her then, his gold eyes reflecting the flames, and she saw something raw in them. Something that made her breath catch. But I also saw moments of light. Saw you helping an injured pup no one else would touch. Saw you leaving food for an elder too proud to accept charity. Saw you standing under the stars with your face tilted toward the moon, whispering prayers for a better tomorrow. And I felt he stopped, his jaw tightening. I felt your capacity for kindness despite everything. Your ability to love a world that had never loved you back. That's what convinced me the prophecy was true. Not your power. Your heart. Lunara couldn't breathe. Couldn't process the idea that this legendary Alpha King, had witnessed her most private moments, her small acts of defiance against cruelty, her desperate attempts to remain good when everything pushed her toward bitterness. He'd seen her. Really seen her. Not as the Mateless Omega, not as the cursed thing, but as herself. Complete and complex and human. I don't know what to say to that, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to say anything. He reached out slowly, his hand finding hers in the space between them, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt both natural and monumental. I just needed you to know that I didn't come looking for you because of prophecy or duty or obligation. I came looking for you because the moon showed me someone worth finding. Someone worth protecting. Someone worth. He cut himself off abruptly, his hand tightening around hers, something flickering across his face that she couldn't identify. Want? Longing? Fear? All of it tangled together in a way that made her wolf press forward, made her own heart rate spike. Worth what? She prompted, not sure she wanted the answer, but needing to hear it anyway. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw a war being waged, duty against desire, propriety against need, the careful control he maintained at all costs against something wild trying to break free. Worth everything, he finally said, and the simple words carried weight that made the air between them feel charged, electric. They sat like that, hands clasped, firelight dancing across their skin, the cavern around them fading into insignificance. Lunara could feel his pulse through their joined palms, could feel his emotions bleeding through the bond, want and restraint, longing and duty, need and denial all mixed together in a tangle she didn't know how to unravel. Her wolf was keening softly, pressing against her consciousness with insistent certainty. Mine. Ours. Claim. The words were instinct, primal, and she had to fight against them because this man wasn't hers. Couldn't be hers. The bond between them was guardian and charge, protector and protected, not what? Not mates. He'd never used that word, had been careful to distinguish between the guardian bond and a mate bond. But in this moment, with his hand in hers and his eyes on her face and his emotions tangled with hers so completely she couldn't tell where she ended and he began. In this moment it felt like something more than duty. Something deeper than prophecy. It felt like choice. Kaelan, she started, not sure what she wanted to say but needing to acknowledge this thing building between them. This tension that had nothing to do with power or prophecy and everything to do with the simple fact of two people drawn together by forces beyond their control. Don't. His voice was rough, strained. Don't ask me questions I can't answer right now. Don't make me examine things I've been trying not to feel since the moment I pulled you from that river. He paused, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that was unconscious, soothing. Just let me teach you. Let me protect you. Let me help you become what you're meant to be. And when this is over, when the barriers are repaired and you're safe and the realm is stable, then we can talk about what this is. When this is over. The promise implicit in those words made her chest ache. Because it meant he felt it too, this pull between them. It meant he was fighting against it, restraining himself, choosing duty over desire just like she was trying to. But it also meant that maybe, one day, when the prophecy was fulfilled and the threats were neutralized, and they were both just themselves without the weight of destiny crushing them, maybe then there could be something more. Okay, she whispered, accepting the boundary he was setting even as part of her wanted to push, to demand answers, to close the distance between them and find out if his lips were as warm as his hands. Okay, teach me. The relief that crossed his face was palpable. He stood, reluctantly releasing her hand, and moved to the center of the cavern where the space was open, clear. Come here. Stand in front of me. Lunara did as he asked, positioning herself an arm's length away, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, but not close enough to touch. The fire behind them cast their shadows across the carved walls, making them look larger, more imposing, two figures locked in some ancient dance. Close your eyes, Kaelan instructed, his voice dropping into that low, hypnotic cadence he'd used in the shrine. Find that place in your chest where your power lives. That warmth, that ember. Can you feel it? She did as he asked, letting her eyes drift shut, sinking inward until she found that familiar presence. The ember was still there, but different now, larger, more insistent after being released earlier. As if it had tasted freedom and was eager for more. I feel it, she confirmed. Good. Now, instead of trying to control it or suppress it, I want you to talk to it. Ask it questions. Treat it like the living thing it is. Because bloodline magic like yours has consciousness, Lunara. It's aware. It responds to how you approach it. The idea of talking to her power like it was a separate entity felt strange, but she tried anyway. Focused on the ember and thought, deliberately, what are you? What do you want? The response was immediate. Not words exactly, but impressions. Images. Feelings. She saw silver flames dancing across a night sky, saw wolves bowing before a woman who blazed with light, saw barriers of pure energy stretching across landscapes. She felt purpose, deep, unyielding purpose. The power wanted to protect, to heal, to restore what had been broken. And it wanted her to let it. It wants to help, she said aloud, surprised by the certainty in her voice. It's not trying to destroy or consume. It wants, she struggled for the right words. It wants to fulfill its purpose. The purpose Astoria gave it. Yes. Kaelan's voice was closer now, though she hadn't heard him move. Your power is an extension of Astoria's will, passed down through generations, waiting for someone strong enough to wield it. And now it's found you. So the question becomes, will you accept it? Will you stop fearing it and start working with it? Will you? She directed the question inward, toward the ember that pulsed with patient anticipation. Yes. The answer was absolute certain. Yes, if you'll trust me. If you'll let me show you what we can be together. I'll try, Lunara whispered, addressing both the power and herself. I'll try to trust you. The ember flared in response, warmth flooding through her veins, and when she opened her eyes, she found her hands glowing again. But this time it was different, not an explosion of light, but a steady radiance, controlled, purposeful. The silver glow extended up her arms, wrapping around her like living light, and she could feel it responding to her thoughts, brightening when she willed it to, dimming when she pulled back. That's it, Kaelan said, his voice rich with approval. That's control. You're not fighting it anymore, not trying to force it into submission. You're partnering with it. She looked up at him and found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. Pride, yes. Satisfaction at her progress. But beneath that, something else. Something that looked dangerously like awe, like he was witnessing something miraculous, something beautiful. Like he was seeing her the way she'd always wanted to be seen. What now? She asked, her voice steadier than she expected. Now, he said, moving around her in a slow circle, assessing, we see what it can do. Keep that glow steady, don't let it flicker, and extend your hand toward that wall. He pointed to the cavern's far side where the carvings were deepest. Lunara did as he asked, extending her right hand, palm out. The glow in her skin intensified, gathering at her palm, and she felt the power respond to her intent. What do you want to show me? A beam of silver light shot from her palm, striking the wall with enough force to make the stone shudder. The ancient carvings lit up where the light touched them, glowing with the same silver radiance, and for a moment the entire cavern blazed with illumination. Then the light faded, settling back into her hand, and she was left staring at what she'd done. Holy moon, she breathed. Holy moon indeed, Kaelan echoed, and when she looked at him his expression was fierce, triumphant. Do you understand what this means? You just activated magic that's been dormant for centuries. You woke up Astoria's legacy with nothing but will and partnership with your power. That's not just control, Lunara. That's mastery waiting to happen. The praise made warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with her power and everything to do with the man standing before her, looking at her like she'd just accomplished something impossible. Like she was already becoming what he believed she could be. Again, she said, not wanting to stop, not wanting to lose this feeling of capability, of agency, of being more than a victim. Teach me more. Kaelan's smile was small but genuine, transforming his face, making him look younger, less burdened. Again, he agreed. And they continued, late into the night, Lunara learning to channel her power with increasing precision, learning to listen to it rather than fear it, learning to trust herself in ways she never had before. And through it all, Kaelan remained beside her, guiding without controlling, teaching without condescending, believing in her when she still struggled to believe in herself. When she finally collapsed, exhausted but exhilarated, he caught her before she hit the ground, carried her to the bedroll he'd prepared, laid her down gently, covered her with blankets that smelled like pine and smoke and him. You did well, he murmured, brushing hair back from her face with a gentleness that made her chest ache. Better than I expected. Better than you know. Stay, she heard herself say, her hand catching his wrist before he could pull away. Please. Just until I fall asleep. I don't want to be alone. For a moment she thought he'd refuse, thought he'd maintain the distance he'd been so careful to preserve. But then he settled himself beside her bedroll, his back against the cavern wall, his hand still caught in hers. I'll stay, he promised quietly. As long as you need. Lunara's eyes drifted closed, exhaustion pulling her under, and the last thing she felt before sleep claimed her was his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. A small gesture. Insignificant, maybe. But in that moment, it felt like everything. They traveled for 2 more days through the tunnels, and with each passing hour, Lunara felt herself changing. Not just her power, though that was growing stronger, more responsive, easier to call and control with each training session Kaelan guided her through. But something deeper. Something fundamental in how she saw herself, how she moved through the world, how she responded to challenges that would have broken her just days ago. She was becoming someone new. Or maybe, she thought as she practiced channeling silver fire through her fingertips during their rest stops, she was becoming who she'd always been meant to be. The girl her mother had hoped to protect long enough to grow into her strength. The Aristoria had sacrificed everything to preserve. The woman Kaelan saw when he looked at her with those gold eyes that tracked her every movement, every expression, every flicker of emotion across her face. They were close now. She could feel it in the way the tunnel air had shifted, grown less stale, carried hints of pine and earth and living things. They'd emerge from underground soon, would face whatever dangers waited in the unclaimed lands between her old territory and his. And then what? She tried not to think too hard about what would happen when they reached the northern territories. When she met his pack, his people, the wolves who'd followed him through wars and peace and everything between. Would they accept her? Would they see her as the prophesied heir, or just another refugee Alpha King had taken pity on? Would they resent the time he'd spent away from them, the resources he was investing in someone who wasn't even part of their pack? Would they expect her to leave once the barriers were repaired? The thought made her chest tight in ways she didn't want to examine. Because somewhere in the past few days, between training sessions and shared meals and quiet conversations by firelight, she'd started to feel something she hadn't felt since she was too young to know better. Safe. Not just physically safe, though Kaelan's presence did provide that, his power a constant shield between her and anything that might threaten harm. But emotionally safe. Like she could speak her fears without judgment, could fail without punishment, could simply exist without having to earn the right to take up space. And more than that. More than safety, more than protection, more than any of the practical benefits his guardianship provided. She'd started to feel seen. Known. Valued for who she was rather than what she could offer or how little trouble she caused. She'd started to feel like maybe, possibly, impossibly. She mattered to him as more than just a prophecy to fulfill. We'll surface within the hour, Kaelan said, breaking through her thoughts. He'd stopped at a junction where the tunnel split into 3 directions, his head tilted as he listened to something she couldn't hear. There's a clearing about half a mile ahead, sheltered, with fresh water. We'll rest there tonight, let you practice your power in open air before we continue. Lunara nodded, adjusting the pack on her shoulders. It was lighter now. They'd been rationing their supplies carefully, knowing the journey would be long. Her body had adjusted to the constant movement, the lack of abundant food, the physical demands of training and traveling simultaneously. She was stronger than she'd been a week ago. Harder. More capable. More herself. They continued in silence, following the rightmost tunnel as it began to slope upward, the silver glow in the walls gradually fading as natural light started filtering through cracks in the stone above. Lunara could smell it now: fresh air, soil, living vegetation. The outside world, calling her back to its dangers and possibilities. When they finally emerged, breaking through a curtain of ivy that concealed the tunnel entrance, the late afternoon sun hit her face like a blessing. She closed her eyes and tilted her head back, letting the warmth sink into her skin, into her bones, reminding her body what daylight felt like after days of darkness. Beautiful, she murmured, and opened her eyes to find the clearing exactly as Kaelan had described. Trees formed a natural perimeter, their branches thick enough to provide cover from above while their trunks were spaced widely enough to allow easy escape routes. A stream cut through the center, crystal clear and cold, and the ground was carpeted with moss soft enough to sleep on. It was perfect. Peaceful. The kind of place that made you forget, just for a moment, that the world was falling apart. Set up camp, Kaelan instructed, already moving to scout the perimeter, his movements efficient and practiced. I want to check for signs of rogues or territorial markings. Stay within the clearing. Lunara did as he asked, unloading their supplies, arranging their bedrolls near the stream where the sound of water would mask any noise they made. She was building a fire pit from stones when she felt it, a prickling at the back of her neck, a sense of being watched that made her wolf stir uneasily. She straightened slowly, her hand moving instinctively to her chest where her power lived. The clearing was still empty except for her, still peaceful. But something was wrong. The birds had gone silent. The wind had died. Kaelan, she called out, keeping her voice steady even as her heart rate spiked. No answer. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the tree line, looking for movement, for shapes that didn't belong, for anything that might explain the sudden wrongness that pressed against her senses like a physical weight. Then she saw them. Wolves. Dozens of them, emerging from the forest in perfect formation, their movements coordinated, purposeful. But these weren't rogues. Weren't random threats. They wore insignias carved into their shoulders, pack marks, territorial claims, identifiers that said these wolves served someone, answered to authority. And at their center, stepping forward with measured confidence, was a man she didn't recognize. Tall, silver-haired despite appearing no older than 40, dressed in formal robes that marked him as a council elder. His eyes were ice blue, cold and assessing, and when he looked at her it was with the kind of clinical interest someone might show a specimen under examination. Lunara Silvercrest, he said, his voice carrying easily across the clearing. The lost heir. The Mateless Omega who isn't mateless at all. How fortunate that we found you before you could reach the Northern Territories and cause even more disruption. Her power surged instantly, responding to the threat, silver light beginning to glow beneath her skin. Who are you? Elder Theron. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture that would have been respectful if not for the wolves surrounding him, blocking every escape route. Representative of the Unified Council, the governing body that maintains order across all territories since the barrier's collapse. We've been tracking you since you fled your birth pack. The Unified Council. She'd heard whispers of them, a coalition of elders from various packs who'd banded together when Ostoria's barriers started failing, claiming they needed centralized authority to manage the chaos. But the whispers had also said they were corrupt, power-hungry, more interested in controlling wolves than protecting them. "Where's Kaelan?" she demanded, the silver light in her hands brightening. "The Alpha King is currently detained." Theron's smile was cold, calculating. "He'll be released unharmed once you come with us peacefully. We have no quarrel with the Northern Territories. Our concern is solely with you." Detained. The word sent ice through her veins. They'd captured him somehow, had managed to subdue an Alpha King powerful enough to make elder wolves submit with a look. Which meant they'd planned this, had prepared specifically for his strength, his abilities. They'd been waiting for her to surface. "What do you want?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt, the power in her hands pulsing in time with her heartbeat. "What we've always wanted." Theron took another step forward, and the wolves moved with him, tightening the circle. "To prevent the mistakes of the past from repeating. Your ancestor, Astoria Silvercrest, nearly destroyed the wolf realm with her tyranny. She forced her will on free packs, restricted their autonomy, demanded submission to her vision of peace. We won't allow another Silvercrest to do the same. She was trying to stop you from killing each other," Lunara shot back, her anger flaring hot enough that the grass beneath her feet began to smoke. "She created the barriers to protect everyone, not to control them. She created chains." Theron's voice hardened. "Beautiful chains, perhaps, but chains nonetheless. And when we finally broke free, when we finally remembered what it meant to be wolves rather than her pets, she shattered everything she'd built rather than accept that her reign was over. The barrier fractures, the disturbances, the realm's instability, all of it is her fault. Her legacy of destruction." He gestured broadly, encompassing not just the clearing, but everything beyond it. "And now you've arrived, her last heir, ready to repair the barriers and return us to subjugation. Ready to bind every pack, every territory, every wolf to a system that denies our fundamental nature. We can't allow that." "So what?" Lunara's hands clenched into fists, silver fire dancing between her fingers. "You're going to kill me? Murder the only person who can stabilize the realm before it tears itself apart. Kill you?" Theron looked genuinely surprised. "No, child. We're not monsters. We're going to help you." The words were so unexpected, so completely opposite of what she'd anticipated, that for a moment she just stared at him. "Help me?" she echoed. "Yes." Theron's expression shifted into something that might have been meant as paternal, reassuring, but came across as condescending instead. "You've been lied to, Lunara. Manipulated by an Alpha King with his own agenda, told you're some prophesied savior when in reality you're just a girl with power you don't understand and can't control. But we understand it. We've studied Astoria's magic for decades, learned how it works, how to channel it safely." He extended his hand toward her, palm up, inviting. "Come with us. Let us teach you the truth about your bloodline, about what your power can do when wielded by those with experience and wisdom. Let us help you become something better than what Kaelan is trying to make you, not a weapon against free will, but a beacon of genuine peace. Peace that comes from choice, not compulsion." Every word was carefully chosen, perfectly calibrated to sound reasonable, compassionate, aligned with her own doubts and fears. And for just a moment, just a heartbeat, she almost believed him. Then she remembered Kaelan's dreams. The visions of her ancestors being hunted, murdered, exterminated by wolves who feared their power. She remembered Astoria standing alone, defending her barriers against those who called her tyrant while their territories collapsed into violence without her protection. She remembered that her mother had died running from people who'd said they only wanted to help. "No," she said simply, and let her power flare brighter. "You're lying. You don't want to help me, you want to control me. Use my power for your own purposes, make sure I never repair the barriers because you benefit from the chaos they're causing." Theron's expression hardened, the false compassion dropping away to reveal something cold and calculating beneath. "I'd hoped you'd be reasonable. That unlike your ancestor, you'd see wisdom in cooperation. But it seems the Silvercrest arrogance breeds true." He raised his hand, and the wolves around him tensed, ready to attack. "Take her. Alive." Subdue her by any means necessary, but do not kill her. We need her alive to access her power." They moved as one, dozens of wolves launching toward her from all sides, coordinated and disciplined in a way that spoke of extensive training. Lunara's power exploded outward instinctively, silver fire creating a barrier between her and the attackers, but there were too many, coming too fast, and she wasn't practiced enough to maintain a full dome. Something hit her from behind, claws raking across her shoulders, pain exploding through her back. She screamed and spun, her power lashing out wildly, catching the wolf in the chest and sending it flying backward. But another took its place immediately, and another, and she was being overwhelmed, driven to her knees under the weight of bodies and teeth and coordinated assault. Then the wolves scattered, yelping, fleeing from something that made them more afraid than their orders. And through the gap they created, Kaelan emerged. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds, his clothes torn, his hair wild, but his eyes blazed with a fury so absolute that the very air around him seemed to burn. Power radiated from him in waves that bent trees, that made the ground tremble, that carried the weight of every war he'd ever won, every enemy he'd ever destroyed. "You made a mistake," he said quietly, his voice somehow carrying over the chaos, somehow reaching every wolf, every elder, every watching eye. "You made the mistake of thinking I could be contained. Of thinking there was a force in this realm strong enough to hold me when someone under my protection was threatened." He looked at Theron, and even from where she was kneeling, bleeding, Lunara could see the elder step back involuntarily. "And now you're going to pay for it." Kaelan moved. She'd seen him fight before, had watched him drive away Breck and the others with nothing but presence and threat. But this was different. This was an Alpha King at full power, unleashed, holding nothing back. He tore through the wolves surrounding Lunara like they were paper, his claws extending to lengths that shouldn't be possible, his strength allowing him to throw fully grown wolves like they weighed nothing. The clearing became chaos. Wolves attacking, Kaelan countering, blood on the moss, the air thick with snarls and yelps and the sick sound of violence. Lunara tried to help, tried to channel her power toward the enemies without hitting Kaelan, but everything was moving too fast. She couldn't track who was where, couldn't risk. Pain exploded in her chest. She looked down, confused, and saw the dart protruding from her sternum. Small. Metal. Glowing with a sickly green light that was already spreading through her veins, already making her vision blur, already dragging her toward unconsciousness. "Wolfsbane," Theron's voice said from somewhere behind her. "Modified to work specifically on bloodline magic. You should have accepted my offer, child. Now we'll have to do this the hard way." Lunara tried to fight it, tried to burn the poison out with her power, but the dart was designed for this, was somehow suppressing her magic, turning the silver fire in her blood to ash. She fell forward, couldn't catch herself, hit the ground with her cheek pressed against moss that smelled like earth and rain and endings. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was Kaelan, turning toward her, his eyes widening in horror, his mouth opening in a roar of rage and grief that seemed to shake the very foundations of the world. Then nothing. When Lunara awoke, she was bound. Not with ropes or chains, something more sophisticated. Silver bands encircled her wrists, her ankles, her throat, all connected by threads of energy that pulsed with a magic she didn't recognize. Every time she tried to reach for her power, the bands tightened, sending pain lancing through her nervous system until she gasped and stopped trying. She was in a cage. Not a cell, an actual cage, metal bars reinforced with more of that strange energy, suspended somehow in the center of a massive chamber carved from black stone. Below her, at least 20 feet down, she could see a floor marked with symbols that glowed the same sickly green as the dart that had taken her down. A ritual chamber. They'd brought her to a place designed for working magic, for channeling power, for ceremonies that required protection and containment. "You're awake." Lunara's head snapped toward the voice and found Theron standing on a platform level with her cage, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression neutral. Behind him, she could see other figures, more elders, she assumed, all watching her with varying degrees of interest and wariness. "Where's Kaelan?" Her voice came out hoarse, raw, like she'd been screaming though she had no memory of it. "Alive," Theron said simply. "We subdued him after you lost consciousness, took 40 of our best warriors and 3 elder-level suppression spells, but we managed. He's currently detained in a separate facility. As I said, we have no quarrel with the Northern Territories. Once we've accomplished our goals here, he'll be released." What goals? But she already knew. Could see it in the symbols below her, in the way the chamber was arranged, in the calculating way the elders were studying her. "You're going to try to steal my power." Steal is such an ugly word. Theron moved closer to the cage, his eyes roaming over her with that same clinical interest. "We're going to redirect it. Channel it through a ritual that will allow us to access Astoria's magic without requiring a Silver Crest heir to wield it. You'll survive the process. Weakened, perhaps, but alive. And in exchange for this small sacrifice, you'll have given the realm true freedom. Freedom from tyranny, from forced compliance, from the chains your ancestor tried to bind us with." Small sacrifice. The casual dismissal of what they were planning to do, tear her power away, leave her hollowed out, turned into exactly the worthless thing her old pack had always claimed she was, made rage burn through her fear. "You're insane," she said flatly. Astoria's magic was tied to her bloodline for a reason. It responds to specific resonance, specific intent. If you try to channel it without that connection, it'll destroy you. We've accounted for that. Theron gestured to the symbols below. This ritual was developed over decades of study, tested on fragments of bloodline magic we recovered from ancient sites. "We know what we're doing. Then why do you need me at all?" Lunara challenged. "If you've figured it out, if you can access the magic without a silver crest, why go through all this effort to capture me?" Theron's smile was thin, cold. Because the power in those fragments was like trying to light a fire with embers. Weak. Barely enough to study, let alone use. But you, his eyes gleamed with something that looked like greed. You carry the full strength of the bloodline. Concentrated, potent, exactly what we need to fuel the ritual that will transfer control to the council permanently. You're not just the key child. You're the entire door. The casual admission that they'd been experimenting with stolen bits of her family's magic, that they'd been planning this for decades, made her stomach turn. How many ancient sites had they desecrated? How many sacred places had they stripped for parts, trying to claim power that was never meant for them? "It won't work," she said with more confidence than she felt. "Even if your ritual doesn't destroy you, even if you somehow manage to steal my power without it killing everyone in this chamber, it won't do what you want. Astoria's magic doesn't serve. It partners. It chooses. And it will never, ever choose people who tortured its heir." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Theron's face. Then it was gone, replaced by cold determination. "We'll see. The ritual begins at moonrise. Just over an hour from now. I'd suggest you make peace with whatever gods you pray to. This will be painful." He turned and walked away, the other elders following, leaving Lunara alone in her suspended cage with nothing but her fear and her fury and the desperate, useless hope that somehow, impossibly, Kaelan would find a way to reach her before it was too late. She tested the bonds again, carefully this time, trying to understand how they worked rather than just fighting against them. The bands responded to her power, she could feel that much. They were designed to detect when she tried to channel magic and punish her for it, creating a feedback loop of pain that was supposed to keep her docile. But what if she didn't try to channel it outward? What if instead of pushing her power against the bonds, she pulled it inward? Compressed it, contained it, made it so small and quiet that the bands didn't register it as a threat? It went against every instinct, against everything Kaelan had taught her about releasing rather than suppressing. But she didn't need release right now. She needed stealth. Needed to gather her strength without alerting her captors. Needed to be ready for whatever opportunity might present itself. So she reached inward, found that ember in her chest, and whispered to it the way she'd learned. "Please, help me. Not with fire or light or obvious power. Help me endure. Help me survive. Help me be ready. The ember responded, warmth spreading through her body, but contained, controlled, invisible to the bands that monitored her. She felt her strength returning incrementally, felt her mind clearing from whatever drugs they'd used to keep her unconscious, felt her wolf stirring from forced dormancy. And she waited. Time crawled by with agonizing slowness. The chamber remained empty except for her, though she could hear movement beyond the doors. Preparations being made, chants being practiced, the machinery of the ritual grinding into motion. The light filtering through high windows shifted from afternoon to evening, shadows lengthening, the sickly green glow of the symbols below growing brighter as darkness approached. Moonrise was coming, and with it, whatever horrible thing they planned to do. She was running out of time. Then, distantly, she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A crash, a roar, the unmistakable noise of violence breaking out somewhere in the facility. Shouts echoed through stone corridors, commands being screamed, the chaos of a carefully laid plan being disrupted by something they hadn't anticipated. Kaelan. She knew it with absolute certainty, felt it through the bond that connected them. He'd broken free. Was coming for her. Was tearing through whatever stood between them with the single-minded determination of an alpha protecting what was his. The doors to the chamber burst open and Theron rushed in, flanked by half a dozen armed guards. His composure was cracked now, his calm facade replaced by barely controlled panic. Begin the ritual, he snapped at someone Lunara couldn't see. Now. We're out of time. But it's not moonrise yet, a voice protested. The alignment isn't. I don't care. Theron was at the controls now, his hands moving over crystalline interfaces that glowed with the same energy as the bonds. Start it now or we lose everything. The Alpha King is. The far wall exploded inward. Stone and dust filled the chamber, guards scattering, Theron stumbling backward from the controls. And through the settling debris, backlit by firelight from the corridor beyond, Kaelan stepped into the chamber. He was covered in blood, his own and others, his clothes in tatters, his body marked with wounds that should have slowed him but somehow didn't. His eyes blazed gold, pure and furious, and when he looked at Lunara suspended in her cage, something in his expression cracked. You made another mistake, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber, somehow calm despite the violence that radiated from him. You thought I'd stop at anything less than her freedom. You thought there was a force you could threaten me with, a consequence you could use to make me hesitate. He took a step forward, and every guard in the chamber took a step back. There isn't. There is nothing in this world or any other that matters more than getting her out of that cage. And anyone who stands between us is going to die. Starting with you. He looked directly at Theron when he said it, and the elder went pale. Lunara wanted to cry out, to warn him about the ritual symbols, about the trap the entire chamber represented, about the way Theron's hand was moving toward the controls again. But her voice was trapped behind the band around her throat, compressed to silence by magic designed to keep her compliant. So instead, she did the only thing she could. She stopped holding back. She took that ember she'd been compressing, containing, keeping small and quiet, and she released it. Not outward toward the bonds, but inward toward herself, flooding her body with power concentrated to levels she'd never attempted before. The bands shrieked in response, tried to punish her, but the pain was distant compared to the absolute certainty that if she didn't do this now, if she didn't help him despite the cost, they would both die here. Silver fire exploded through her veins, through her bones, through every cell until she was burning from the inside out. The bands cracked, couldn't contain it, shattered into fragments of metal and energy that dissipated into nothing. The cage itself began to glow, the bars heating until they melted, and Lunara fell. Kaelan was there. Caught her before she hit the symbols below, his arms wrapping around her, his power wrapping around hers, containing it, channeling it, preventing her from burning herself out completely. They landed together in a crouch at the chamber's center, and she felt his heart pounding against her back, felt his breath hot against her temple, felt his absolute fury at what had been done to her. Can you stand? he asked quietly, urgently. She nodded, finding her feet, finding her center. Her power was still blazing, still dangerous, but with Kaelan's presence grounding her, she could control it. Could direct it. Could use it. The guards were advancing, weapons drawn, but they moved with uncertainty now. With fear. Because standing before them weren't two separate entities, they were Alpha King and bloodline heir, power and prophecy, wrath and righteousness, combined into something that made the very air tremble. Last chance, Kaelan said, addressing the entire chamber. Stand down. Let us leave. And maybe the Northern Territories won't declare war on the Unified Council for this atrocity. For a moment, Lunara thought they might actually listen. Might recognize they were outmatched, outpowered, facing something beyond their ability to contain. Then Theron's hand slammed down on the controls. The ritual activated. Every symbol in the chamber blazed with green light, energy lancing upward in beams that converged at the point where the cage had been. Where Lunara had been meant to be, bound and helpless, when the ritual tore her power away. But she wasn't there anymore. She was on the ground, standing beside Kaelan, and when the ritual's magic reached for her, it found nothing to grab. Because she was no longer suppressed, no longer contained, no longer the helpless victim they'd designed this ceremony around. She was awake, active, and absolutely done with being anyone's sacrifice. "You wanted my power," she said, her voice echoing strangely, layered with something ancient, something that came from the magic itself. "You wanted to steal what belongs to the Silvercrest bloodline? Then let me show you exactly what you're trying to claim." She raised her hands and let the fire come. Not wild, not uncontrolled, but focused with all the training Kaelan had given her, all the practice, all the partnership she'd built with the magic in her blood. Silver flames poured from her palms, meeting the ritual's green energy, and where they touched, the green light shattered. The symbols cracked, their power breaking against hers, unable to contain or redirect or steal anything because she wasn't giving. She was taking back. Taking back every fragment of bloodline magic they'd stolen from sacred sites, every ember they'd drained from ancient artifacts, every piece of her ancestors' legacy they'd tried to claim for themselves. The ritual collapsed, imploded, turned on itself with violent force that made the entire chamber shake. Theron screamed something. An order, a curse, a plea, but it was lost in the roar of magic being forcibly returned to its rightful owner. When the light finally faded, when the chamber stopped shaking and the dust settled, Lunara found herself still standing. Still conscious. Still burning with power that felt stronger, clearer, more complete than it had before. She'd just reclaimed pieces of herself she hadn't even known were missing. Theron was on his knees, his robes singed, his hair wild, his eyes wide with disbelief. Around him, the guards were unconscious, overwhelmed by the backlash of a ritual that had turned on its creators. The only one still standing besides Lunara was Kaelan, and he was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "We need to leave," he said quietly. "Before reinforcements arrive. Before the council sends everything they have." He was right. They needed to run, to escape, to get out before this turned into a battle they couldn't win. But Lunara found herself moving toward Theron instead, found herself standing over the elder who'd planned to hollow her out, to steal her birthright, to leave her broken and powerless so they could play at being gods. "Tell the council," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "Tell them that Lunara Silvercrest is done hiding, done running, done apologizing for existing. Tell them the next time they come for me, I won't just defend myself. I'll show them exactly what Astoria's heir can do when she stops holding back." Theron looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw fear. Real, genuine fear. "You're going to destroy everything," he whispered. "No," she corrected. "I'm going to save it. Whether you deserve saving or not." Then she turned and walked away, Kaelan falling into step beside her, his hand finding hers and holding tight. They moved through corridors still smoking from his violent entry, past bodies she tried not to look at too closely, through facility doors that hung broken on their hinges. And they didn't stop. Didn't slow. Just kept moving into the darkness beyond, into the forest, into whatever came next. Behind them, the facility burned. Whether from the ritual's collapse or something Kaelan had done on his way in, Lunara didn't know and didn't care. All that mattered was forward. Survival. Making it to the northern territories where they'd be safe long enough to plan their next move. They ran until dawn broke, until her legs threatened to give out, until Kaelan finally called a halt in a clearing that felt safe enough for a brief rest. They collapsed together against a fallen log, breathing hard, bleeding, exhausted. "You saved me," Lunara said after a moment, when she had enough air for words. "You broke through their defenses, their traps, everything they'd prepared. You came for me." "Of course I did." Kaelan turned to look at her, his gold eyes steady despite the exhaustion written across his features. "You're bound to me, Lunara. Your death is my death, your pain is my pain, your fear." He stopped, his jaw tightening. "When I felt them take you, when I felt that dart pierce your chest and your consciousness start to fade, I stopped being rational. Stopped being the careful Alpha King who weighs consequences. I became something simpler. Something that would burn down the entire realm before letting you be harmed." The confession hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying in its intensity. "The Council will retaliate," Lunara said quietly. "They'll send armies. They'll try again, better prepared, with more power. We just made enemies of the most influential governing body in the realm." "I know." Kaelan didn't sound concerned. Didn't sound worried about politics or consequences or any of the careful calculations an Alpha King should be making. "Let them come. Let them try. They'll learn what happens when they threaten what's mine. Mine." The words settled over her like a brand, like a promise, like something that should have felt possessive, but instead felt like safety. Like belonging. Like finally, after 22 years of being unwanted, someone was claiming her. Choosing her. Willing to fight the entire world to keep her. "We should keep moving," she said, because she didn't know what to do with the emotions churning in her chest, didn't know how to process everything that had happened. "Get to your territory before they organize pursuit." "Soon," Kaelan agreed. But first, he turned toward her fully, his hands coming up to cup her face, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "First, I need you to know something. In case they do manage to catch us again, in case something happens and we get separated, in case." "Don't," she interrupted. "Don't talk like we're going to lose." "I'm not." His voice was fierce, absolute. "But I need to say this anyway. I need you to know that finding you, protecting you, standing with you through this, it's not duty, Lunara. It stopped being duty the moment I pulled you from that river and saw you look at me like I was someone worth trusting. It stopped being prophecy the moment you fell asleep with your hand in mine, and I realized I'd sit there forever if it meant keeping you safe. This is..." He stopped, seeming to struggle with words, with admissions that went against every careful boundary he'd tried to maintain. "This is choice. My choice. To stand with you. To fight for you. To see this through not because the moon commanded it, but because I can't imagine doing anything else." Lunara couldn't breathe. Couldn't think past the weight of what he was saying, the depth of feeling in his voice, the absolute certainty in his eyes. This legendary Alpha King, this man who commanded territories and won wars and made other Alphas kneel, was telling her she mattered. Not as prophecy or heir or vessel for ancient power, but as herself. As Lunara. The girl who'd survived hell and was still learning how to hope. "Kaelan," she started, not sure what she wanted to say but needing to respond, needing to acknowledge what he'd just given her. "You don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "You don't owe me words or feelings or anything except your trust. Just trust me. Trust that I won't let them take you again. Trust that we're going to survive this. Trust that when this is over, when the prophecy is fulfilled and the barriers are repaired and the realm is stable. Trust that there's more waiting for us than just goodbye. More." The promise of it made her chest ache with longing so intense it was almost pain. Because yes, she wanted more. Wanted to see what they could be without destiny forcing them together, without threats chasing them, without the weight of the realm's survival crushing them into shapes that weren't quite their own. She wanted to choose him the way he was choosing her. "I trust you," she whispered, the words a vow, a promise, a truth she'd never thought she'd be able to speak. "I trust you." His expression cracked open, revealing something so raw, so vulnerable, that it made her chest ache. Not the careful control of an Alpha King. Not the measured distance of a guardian bound by duty. Just a man who'd been terrified of losing someone he couldn't afford to lose. "I trust you," she said again, louder this time, making it a vow that echoed in the quiet clearing. "And when this is over, when we're not running, not fighting, not constantly one step from death, I want to know what that more looks like. I want to choose it. Choose you. Not because prophecy says we're connected, but because you saw me when no one else would. Because you made me believe I was worth saving." Something shifted in the air between them. Something that felt like destiny reshaping itself, like the moon herself nodding in approval, like the universe exhaling in relief, because two souls meant to collide had finally acknowledged what had been building since the moment he'd pulled her from dark water and called her by name. Kaelan leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers, his breath warm against her lips, and for one suspended heartbeat Lunara thought he might kiss her. Thought he might close that final distance and turn this moment into something that couldn't be taken back, couldn't be questioned, couldn't be anything except exactly what it felt like. A claiming, a choosing, a beginning. But he didn't. Instead, he pulled back slightly, his thumb tracing her jaw in a gesture so tender it made her throat tight. "When I kiss you," he said quietly, intensely, "it won't be when we're covered in blood and running for our lives. It won't be in a stolen moment between catastrophes. It'll be when we have time. When we're safe. When I can do it properly and show you exactly how long I've been thinking about it." The promise in his words made heat pool low in her belly, made her wolf keen with frustrated longing, made every nerve ending in her body come alive with anticipation for something that would have to wait. But the waiting, knowing it was coming, knowing he wanted it as much as she did, somehow made it more precious, more real. "Then we'd better survive," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Because I'm going to hold you to that." His smile was small but genuine, transforming his face in ways that made him look younger, less burdened. "I'm counting on it." They sat there for another moment, just breathing, just existing in this space between disaster and whatever came next. Then Kaelan stood, extending his hand to pull her up, and they began moving again. North. Always north. Toward territory that promised safety, allies, time to plan their next move. Toward a future that, for the first time in Lunara's life, felt like something worth fighting for. They reached the northern territories 3 days later. 3 days of constant movement, of sleeping in shifts, of training whenever they stopped long enough to catch their breath. 3 days of Lunara learning to channel her power with increasing precision, of discovering that the fragments she'd reclaimed from the Council's ritual hadn't just strengthened her, they'd completed something fundamental. Made her whole in ways she hadn't known she was broken. The border was marked by ancient stones taller than 3 men standing atop each other, carved with symbols that pulsed with protective magic. The moment Lunara crossed the threshold between unclaimed lands and Kaelan's territory, she felt it, a shift in the air, in the energy, in the very ground beneath her feet. This place was saturated with his power, with centuries of careful stewardship, with the kind of wild magic that came from land that remembered its first wolves. It was beautiful. Harsh. Exactly like him. "Welcome home," Kaelan said quietly, and she realized he wasn't talking to himself. He was talking to her. Welcoming her to a place he thought she might belong, might stay, might build something beyond survival. The thought made her chest tight with emotions she didn't have names for. They descended from the border ridge into a valley where the pack's main settlement spread across the landscape, like something out of old stories. Not the cramped, suspicious cluster of buildings her birth pack had huddled in, but a community that seemed to breathe with the forest around it. Homes built into living trees, pathways that followed natural terrain rather than forcing the land to conform, gathering spaces that felt sacred rather than merely functional. And wolves. Everywhere she looked, Wolves in human and shifted form, moving through their daily lives with an ease that spoke of genuine peace. Children played without supervision, their laughter carrying on the wind. Elders sat in circles, sharing stories. Warriors sparred in open clearings, their movements fluid and joyous rather than brutal. This was what a pack could be when it wasn't rotting from fear and hatred. This was what she'd spent her whole life dreaming existed somewhere beyond the cruelty she'd known. Kaelan! The shout came from ahead, and Lunara looked up to see wolves emerging from the settlement, moving toward them with a mixture of relief and urgency. At their head was a woman who moved with authority that marked her as beta or similar rank, tall, muscular, her dark hair braided back from a face that was beautiful in a fierce, uncompromising way. "You're alive," the woman said when she reached them, and there was genuine emotion in her voice. Not just relief, but something deeper. Affection. Respect. "We felt your distress through the territory bond 3 days ago. When you didn't return immediately, we thought—" "I'm fine, Sarah," Kaelan interrupted gently. "We ran into complications with the Unified Council, but we handled it. This is Lunara Silvercrest." Sarah's eyes had already found her, were studying her with an intensity that made Lunara want to shrink back. But she held her ground, lifted her chin, met the beta's gaze without flinching. "The lost heir. The one you've been searching for." It wasn't a question. News had traveled faster than they had, apparently. Or maybe Kaelan had some way of communicating with his pack that she didn't understand yet. "Yes," Kaelan confirmed. "She needs sanctuary while we prepare for what's coming. The council won't stop with one failed capture. They'll regroup, gather forces, come at us with everything they have." Sarah nodded slowly, her expression shifting from assessment to calculation. "Then we prepare for war. The council has been a thorn in our side for years. Maybe it's time we reminded them why the northern territories aren't claimed by their jurisdiction." The casual discussion of war should have terrified Lunara. Should have made her want to refuse sanctuary, to leave rather than drag these people into her problems. But something Kaelan had said during their journey kept echoing in her mind. Your fight is everyone's fight. The barriers affect every wolf in every territory. Saving yourself means saving all of them, whether they realize it yet or not. "I don't want to bring war to your doorstep," Lunara said quietly, addressing Sarah directly. "I don't want anyone dying because they offered me shelter." Sarah's expression softened slightly, not quite a smile but close. "Child, war was always coming. The council's corruption, their hunger for power, their willingness to sacrifice anyone who threatens their control. It was inevitable that someone would have to stand against them. Better it be us, with the resources and strength to actually win, than some smaller pack they could crush without consequence." She turned to Kaelan. "The council sent emissaries 2 days ago. Demanded we turn over any information about the Silvercrest heir, threatened sanctions if we didn't comply. I told them to leave before I removed their ability to carry messages." Kaelan's smile was sharp, proud. "I knew I left things in good hands." "You left things in competent hands," Sarah corrected dryly. "There's a difference. Now come on, you both look like you've been through 3 hells and need food, healing, and actual rest. We can discuss strategy once you're not swaying on your feet." She was right. Now that they'd stopped moving, now that the constant vigilance could ease just slightly, Lunara felt the full weight of exhaustion crashing over her. Her legs were trembling, her vision blurring at the edges, her power flickering with instability that came from pushing too hard for too long. Kaelan's hand found her elbow, steadying her. "Can you walk?" "Yes," she lied, then amended when his expression called her out. "Maybe, if you don't let go." He didn't. Kept his hand on her elbow as they followed Sarah into the settlement, through pathways lined with wolves who stopped to stare, to whisper, to watch the legendary heir who'd survived the council's capture. Some looked curious, some skeptical, but none looked hostile, and that alone was so different from what she'd known that it made her want to cry. They were brought to a building larger than the others. The pack house, she assumed, though it looked more like a great hall than the cramped administrative building her birth pack had used. Inside, the space was warm, welcoming, filled with the scent of food cooking and the sound of conversation that died the moment they entered. Every eye turned toward them. Toward her. Lunara fought the instinct to hide behind Kaelan, to make herself smaller, less visible. These weren't her enemies. They were just curious. Just trying to assess whether she was threat or ally, whether she deserved their alpha's protection. "This is Lunara," Kaelan announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Last heir of the Silver Crest bloodline. The one prophesied to repair the barriers and restore balance to the realm. She is under my protection, which means she is under the protection of every wolf in this territory. Anyone who threatens her answers to me. Anyone who helps her honors the pack." The declaration was formal, binding, the kind of pronouncement that couldn't be taken back. He was claiming her in front of his entire pack, tying his reputation to hers, making it clear that her enemies would become his enemies. The weight of it was crushing and liberating all at once. A male stepped forward from the crowd, older, scarred, carrying himself with the bearing of a warrior who'd seen too many battles. "And when the council comes for her, when they bring armies to our borders and demand we hand her over or face destruction, then we remind them," Kaelan said calmly, "that the northern territories have never bowed to threats. That we've survived worse than power-hungry elders playing at politics. That trying to take her from us would be the last mistake they ever make." The male studied them both for a long moment, then nodded sharply and stepped back. Whatever test that had been, apparently they'd passed. Sarah appeared at Lunara's other side, her presence grounding. "Come on. There's a healing suite prepared, and you look like you're about 10 seconds from collapse. We can handle the rest of the meet and greet later." Lunara let herself be led away, Kaelan staying close, his presence a constant reassurance that she wasn't alone in this. The healing suite turned out to be a series of connected rooms designed for recovery, soft beds, windows that let in natural light, and most importantly, privacy. "Sleep," Kaelan ordered gently when they were alone. "Actually rest. I'll be right outside if you need anything, but you're safe here, Lunara." "I promise." She wanted to argue, to insist she could keep going, but her body was already shutting down. She barely made it to the bed before exhaustion pulled her under, dragging her into sleep so deep that dreams couldn't find her. She woke to chaos. Alarms were screaming. Not mechanical but magical, wards triggering across the territory with a sound that vibrated in her bones. She was on her feet before conscious thought caught up, her power flooding through her veins in response to threat she couldn't see yet, but could feel approaching. Kaelan burst through the door, already partially shifted, his eyes blazing gold. "They're here. The council brought an army easily 200 strong, maybe more. They're demanding we turn you over or they'll raise the entire settlement." 200. Against how many here? Even if the northern territories were strong, even if Kaelan's wolves were better trained, those numbers were overwhelming. "How long do we have?" Lunara asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Minutes. Maybe less. They're not bothering with negotiations or warnings this time." His expression was grim, furious. "They want you badly enough to risk open war. Because she'd taken back the fragments they'd stolen. Because she'd proven she could access Astoria's full power. Because letting her live, letting her grow stronger, letting her potentially repair the barriers meant they'd lose everything they'd built on the realm's instability. She was the key. The threat. The one thing standing between them and permanent control. "Then I'll go to them," Lunara said simply. "No." The word was absolute, final. "We're not." Not surrendering, she interrupted, moving toward him, her hands finding his. "I'm going to end this. I'm going to show them exactly what happens when you hunt a Silver Crest heir to the point where she stops being afraid and starts getting angry." Understanding flickered across his features, followed by concern. "Your power, you've only been training for days. You don't know your limits yet, don't know what sustained battle will cost you. Then I guess we'll find out." She squeezed his hands once, hard, then released him and moved toward the door. "Get your wolves to safety. Protect the children, the elders, anyone who can't fight. This ends now, Kaelan. One way or another." She didn't wait for his response. Didn't give him time to argue or try to stop her. Just walked out of the healing suite, through the pack house, toward the main gates where she could feel the council's army pressing against the territory's wards like a massive, malevolent weight. Wolves scattered as she passed, responding to the power that was already beginning to radiate from her invisible waves. Silver light traced her veins, made her skin glow, turned her eyes into mirrors that reflected something ancient and furious. She reached the gates and pushed them open with a thought, with will, with power that responded to her intent like it had been waiting her entire life for permission to be exactly what it was. Outside, spread across the valley in a formation designed to intimidate, the council's army waited. 200 wolves in various stages of shift, all armed, all radiating hostile intent. And at their center, riding a massive black wolf like some parody of ancient conquerors, Elder Theron looked down at her with cold satisfaction. "Lunara Silvercrest," he called out, his voice magically amplified to carry across the distance. "You will surrender yourself to the Council's custody, or we will take you by force and destroy everyone who stood in our way." She took a step forward, then another, walking past the gates, past the wards, onto neutral ground where nothing protected her except her own power and will. "You made a mistake," she said, her voice carrying without magical enhancement, powered by something deeper than spell work. "You gave me 3 days to recover. 3 days to reclaim what you stole. 3 days to remember that I'm not the broken girl you tried to hollow out in your ritual chamber." Her power surged, responding to her rising fury, to her absolute certainty that this ended now. Silver flames erupted around her, not wild but controlled, dancing across her skin without burning, wrapping her in light that made the afternoon sun look dim. "I am Lunara Silvercrest," she continued, her voice taking on layers, echoes, the weight of generations speaking through her. "Last daughter of the bloodline you tried to exterminate. Heir to power that was never yours to claim. And I am done being your victim." She raised her hands and let the fire come in earnest. It poured from her palms in streams of liquid silver, spreading across the ground between her and the army, creating a barrier that blazed with heat intense enough to make the front lines stumble backward. But she wasn't attacking. Not yet. This was warning. This was giving them one final chance to retreat, to reconsider, to recognize that what they were facing wasn't a frightened Omega but a force of nature awakened. "Leave," she said, absolute in her conviction. "Take your army, take your threats, take your corruption back to whatever holes you crawled from. And maybe, I won't hunt every single one of you down for what you tried to do." Theron's expression twisted into something ugly. "You think you can stand against 200 trained warriors? You think raw power makes up for skill, strategy, experience? You're still just a girl playing at being something you're not." He raised his hand, and the army surged forward. They hit her barrier and it held. Not just held, pushed back, the silver flames intensifying until wolves were thrown backward, their fur singed, their confidence cracking. But there were so many. They kept coming, kept pressing, kept trying to overwhelm through sheer numbers what they couldn't match in power. Lunara felt herself being pushed back, felt the barrier beginning to buckle under sustained assault. Her power was vast, but untrained for this, for holding against hundreds simultaneously, for maintaining control while under constant pressure. She was burning through reserves faster than she could replenish them, and Theron knew it. Could see it. Was counting on her exhausting herself before they ran out of bodies to throw at her. Then Kaelan was beside her. She hadn't heard him approach, hadn't sensed him moving into position. But suddenly his power was flowing into hers, not taking over but supporting, showing her how to distribute the load, how to create multiple smaller barriers instead of one massive one, how to be efficient rather than overwhelming. "Together," he said quietly, and she felt through their bond exactly what he meant. Not her standing alone. Not him fighting while she watched. Together. Combined. Two powers working in harmony rather than one struggling against impossible odds. The barrier stabilized. Strengthened. Began pushing outward again with renewed force that made the Council's wolves stumble, made their formation crack, made doubt flicker across Theron's features. The northern territories stand with their heir. Kaelan's voice rang out, and behind them, at the gates, Lunara heard it, the answering howl of an entire pack pledging their strength to the fight. Sarah appeared on her other side, her own power adding to the collective defense. Then another wolf, and another, until Lunara was at the center of a formation that blazed with combined strength. Not one girl against an army. One pack defending what was theirs. The realization hit her like lightning. This was what Astoria had been trying to build. Not tyranny. Not control. Unity. Cooperation. Wolves choosing to stand together rather than tearing each other apart. And the council feared it because unified wolves couldn't be manipulated, controlled, pitted against each other for the benefit of those who craved power. "I don't need to fight you alone," Lunara called out to Theron, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "Because I'm not alone. I have a pack. I have allies. I have wolves who see the truth you're trying to bury. That the realm doesn't need your control. It needs healing. It needs the barriers restored. It needs what Astoria tried to give before you murdered her for it." She pulled her power back, condensing it, shaping it with all the training Kaelan had given her. And instead of creating barriers, instead of defending, she went on offense. Silver flames erupted across the valley floor, racing toward the council's army in patterns that were strategic rather than chaotic. They wrapped around weapons, making them too hot to hold. They circled groups of wolves, not burning but containing, separating the army into isolated pockets that couldn't coordinate. And most importantly, they reached for Theron. The elder tried to run, tried to shield himself, but her power was faster, stronger, fueled by righteous fury and the bone-deep certainty that she was right. The flames wrapped around him, lifted him from his mount, held him suspended in the air where everyone could see. "Your army has a choice," Lunara announced, addressing not Theron, but the wolves he commanded. "Stand down. Leave. Return to your territories and tell them what you witnessed here. Or continue following orders from a man who is willing to sacrifice all of you to capture one girl because he fears what she represents." She squeezed, just slightly, and Theron gasped, the flames tightening around him like living rope. "He told you I was dangerous. Told you I'd destroy the realm. But I've had you at my mercy for 3 minutes now, and the only one I'm threatening is him. Does that sound like someone who wants to enslave you? Or someone who just wants to stop being hunted?" Silence stretched across the valley. Lunara could feel the army's uncertainty, their doubt, the way her display had cracked the absolutism Theron had used to motivate them. These weren't fanatics. They were just wolves following orders, believing they were protecting the realm from a threat. But that threat was now showing mercy they probably wouldn't have received if positions were reversed. One by one, wolves began shifting back to human form, lowering weapons, stepping away from formation. Not retreating exactly, but definitely not attacking either. The army was fracturing, splintering, discipline breaking under the weight of what they were actually seeing versus what they'd been told. "You lied to them," Lunara said to Theron, her voice dropping to something quieter but no less intense. "You've been lying for decades. About Astoria, about the barriers, about what my bloodline actually represents. You want chaos because it gives you power. You want the realm fractured because it makes you indispensable. But I'm going to repair the barriers. I'm going to restore what my ancestor built. And when I do, when wolves can finally live without constant fear of dissolution, territorial bleeding, shadow creatures crossing over, they're going to remember who stood against it, who tried to keep them in chaos, who chose personal power over collective survival." She released him, let him fall to the ground in an undignified heap. "Take your remaining loyalists and go. And pray that when I'm done repairing the barriers, when I have time to actually hunt down everyone responsible for hunting my family to near extinction, that the moon shows you more mercy than you showed us." Theron scrambled to his feet, his robes torn, his dignity shattered. For a moment Lunara thought he might order one final assault, one desperate attempt to reclaim control. But then he looked at his army. At the wolves who'd already abandoned their positions, at the ones watching with doubt rather than fervor, at the complete absence of certainty that had driven them here. He'd lost. And he knew it. "This isn't over," he managed, but the words were hollow, empty of conviction. "Yes," Lunara corrected quietly. "It is. You just don't know it yet." She turned her back on him, the ultimate dismissal, and walked back toward the gates. Toward Kaelan, who was watching her with an expression that made her chest ache. Toward Sarah and the other Northern Territories wolves who'd stood with her. Toward the pack that had chosen to see her as ally rather than threat. Behind her, she heard the Council's army beginning to retreat. Discipline breaking completely as they fled rather than marched, fear driving them faster than orders ever could. She'd won. Not through violence or domination or any of the things they'd accused her ancestor of, but through mercy. Through showing them exactly what kind of leader she would be, one who defended fiercely but didn't pursue vengeance, who stood her ground but didn't seek conquest. One who remembered that every wolf in that army was someone's son, daughter, packmate, friend. That violence should always be last resort rather than first response. When she reached Kaelan, when their eyes met, she saw something shift in his expression. Not just pride or relief. Something deeper. Something that looked like recognition, as if he'd been waiting his entire life to see someone embody exactly what a true leader should be. "That," he said quietly, for her ears alone, "is why the moon chose you." Lunara's legs gave out then, exhaustion finally catching up, the massive expenditure of power taking its toll. But Kaelan caught her before she fell, his arms wrapping around her, his strength supporting her when hers failed. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "Always." And for the first time since this entire nightmare began, Lunara let herself believe it. Let herself lean into his strength without guilt or fear or the constant weight of proving she deserved help. Let herself be exactly what she was. Powerful and exhausted, victorious and vulnerable, a prophesied heir and just a girl who'd fought harder than anyone should have to simply exist. The pack surrounded them, not crowding but creating a protective circle, and as consciousness began to slip away from her, Lunara heard their voices rising in chorus. Not howls of war, not cries of victory, but songs. Ancient songs that welcomed home the lost, that celebrated the bloodline returned, that promised protection to those who stood for something worth defending. She'd found her pack, her purpose, her place, and she'd never be alone again. 3 weeks passed in the Northern Territories, and Lunara learned what it meant to breathe without fear. Not completely, the Council was still out there, licking their wounds, regrouping. Threats didn't vanish just because you stood against them once. But for the first time in her life, she woke each morning to sunlight instead of dread. To voices calling her name with warmth instead of contempt. To a world that saw her as something more than the Mateless Omega who deserved whatever cruelty came her way. She trained. Every single day, Kaelan worked with her, pushing her power to new limits, teaching her control that went beyond raw strength. How to weave barriers that could last for hours. How to sense disturbances in the magical currents that flowed through the realm. How to speak to the ancient places where Astoria's legacy still pulsed, waiting for the heir who could finally make it whole again. But it wasn't just training. It was connection. Understanding. The kind of partnership that came from two people learning to move as one, not because prophecy demanded it, but because they chose it. Every morning they sparred in the clearing where silver flames met raw alpha dominance and neither gave ground. Every evening they sat by firelight, sharing stories of the lives they'd lived before fate collided them together. And every night, the space between them grew smaller, charged with a tension that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with want. He still hadn't kissed her. Was waiting like he'd promised, for the right moment. For safety that felt permanent rather than temporary. For time that wasn't borrowed from enemies gathering strength. But the way he looked at her, like she was something precious, powerful, worth every sacrifice he'd made, that was its own kind of claiming. The pack accepted her. Not immediately, not without questions, but gradually. They saw her heal a pup's broken leg with silver light that knitted bone without pain. They watched her spend hours with the elders, learning their histories, honoring their stories, treating them as teachers rather than obstacles. They witnessed her training with warriors who would have dismissed her weeks ago, holding her own against wolves 3 times her size through skill rather than just power. And most importantly, they saw how she looked at their Alpha King. How she softened around him, how her guarded expression eased into something genuine. How she trusted him in ways that made it clear she hadn't trusted anyone in a very long time. Wolves understood mate bonds. Understood the pull between souls meant to collide. And even though no mark had appeared, even though Kaelan maintained careful boundaries, everyone could see what was building between them. Could see that when the prophecy was fulfilled, when the barriers were repaired and the realm stabilized, there would be another ceremony. Another claiming. One that had nothing to do with guardian bonds and everything to do with choice. On the 22nd day, Kaelan came to find her at dawn, his expression grave. "What's wrong?" Lunara asked immediately, her power rising instinctively in response to his tension. "Nothing's wrong." But he didn't look relieved. He looked determined. Resolved. Like he'd made a decision that cost him something. It's time. The barriers are failing faster. 3 territories reported complete dissolution of their borders overnight. Shadow creatures are crossing over in numbers we can't contain. If we don't act now, if we don't repair what Astoria fractured, there won't be a realm left to save. Time. The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Because repairing the barriers meant accessing the full scope of her power. Meant potentially burning herself out. Meant standing at the center of ancient magic and hoping she was strong enough, trained enough, ready enough to channel forces that had destroyed lesser wolves who'd tried. It meant risking everything on one final gamble. Where, she asked simply. The first shrine. Where Astoria originally wove the barrier system. It's 3 days north, in territory that's currently unclaimed because the magic there is too unstable for anyone to survive. He moved closer, his hands finding hers, his gold eyes searching her face. "I'll be with you every step. The pack's strongest will come as well, not to fight, but to anchor you. To pour their strength into yours, so you're not carrying the load alone." Anchoring. The concept was simple but profound. Wolves lending their power through pack bonds, creating a network that would distribute the strain. Not one heir standing alone like Astoria had. But one heir supported by dozens, by hundreds if necessary, all choosing to share the burden of healing their realm. It was beautiful. Terrifying. Everything the council feared because it represented true unity rather than control. "When do we leave?" Lunara asked. "An hour. Gather what you need, say your goodbyes if..." He stopped, his jaw tightening. Just in case. Just in case she didn't come back. Just in case the power consumed her. Just in case 3 weeks of training wasn't enough to prepare her for channeling magic that had shaped reality itself. Lunara squeezed his hands once hard. "I'm coming back. We both are. And when we do, when the barriers are repaired and the realm is stable and we have time, you're keeping that promise." Understanding flickered across his features, followed by something that looked like fierce hope. "The kiss. Everything," she corrected. "Every moment you've been holding back. Every word you haven't said. Every choice you've been waiting to make until the timing was right. I want all of it, Kaelan. So we survive this. Both of us. Together." His expression cracked open again, revealing that vulnerability he usually kept so carefully controlled. "Together," he echoed, and pulled her into an embrace that felt like a vow. They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other, gathering strength from connection. Then Lunara pulled back, squared her shoulders, and went to prepare for the journey that would determine the fate of every wolf in the realm. The first shrine was nothing like she'd expected. Not a building or temple or even recognizable structure. Just a clearing where reality felt thin, where the veil between physical world and pure magic was almost transparent. The ground was marked with symbols so old they'd worn into the stone itself, and at the center, a pillar of light rose from earth to sky, not solid, but not entirely immaterial either. Something in between. Something that existed in multiple states simultaneously. Astoria's anchor point. The place where she'd first woven the barriers that separated territories, prevented violence from bleeding over borders, kept shadow creatures in their own realm. The place where she'd later shattered everything rather than let it be used for tyranny. Lunara could feel the fractures from 100 yards away, could sense how the barriers were barely holding, how reality itself was straining under the pressure of magic that had been broken too long. 3 more days, maybe 4, and the system would collapse completely. Territories would dissolve into each other. Shadow creatures would flood through. The careful balance that let wolves coexist with the natural world would shatter. Chaos. Complete, realm-ending chaos. Are you ready? Kaelan asked quietly. No. She wasn't ready. Wasn't ready to carry the weight of everyone's survival. Wasn't ready to channel power that might burn her from the inside out. Wasn't ready to stand where her ancestor had stood and hope she was worthy of the legacy she'd been born into. But ready or not, this was happening. Yes, she said, and meant it. The pack formed a circle around the shrine, 50 of the Northern Territory's strongest, all willing to lend their power to this moment. Sarah stood at the east point, her expression fierce and proud. Other wolves she'd come to know over the past weeks took positions at the cardinal directions: warriors, healers, elders, even some of the young who'd insisted on being part of this despite the danger. And Kaelan stood directly behind her, his hands on her shoulders, his power already beginning to flow through their bond in preparation for what came next. Remember, he murmured against her ear, "You're not doing this alone. Draw on us. Draw on the pack. Draw on everything and everyone who believes in you." Lunara took a breath, then another, centering herself the way he'd taught her. Finding that ember in her chest that had grown from spark to inferno over weeks of training. Feeling it respond to her will, eager and ready and absolutely certain of purpose. She stepped forward into the circle of ancient symbols. The moment her bare feet touched the worn stone, power slammed into her like a physical blow. Not attacking, recognizing. The shrine knew what she was, knew what she carried, and it was reaching for her with desperate hunger. Begging her to fix what had been broken. To make it whole again. To restore the balance her ancestor had sacrificed everything to create. Lunara gasped, staggered, would have fallen if not for Kaelan's presence steadying her. The power was overwhelming, too much, too vast, like trying to drink an ocean through a straw. She couldn't channel this. Couldn't possibly. Then she felt it. The pack bonds activating, 50 wolves pouring their strength into her simultaneously. Not overwhelming her further, but creating channels, pathways, distribution networks that let her handle the load. Sarah's warrior discipline. An elder's centuries of experience. A healer's gentle precision. A youth's raw enthusiasm. All of it flowing through her, combining with her own power, amplifying rather than drowning. She could do this. She lifted her hands toward the pillar of light, and silver fire erupted from her palms in streams that connected with Astoria's anchor point. The moment they touched, the world exploded into vision. She saw everything. Every territory simultaneously. Every fracture in the barrier system. Every place where shadow creatures were pushing through, where reality was bleeding, where the careful separations Astoria had built were coming undone. She saw wolves dying because storms appeared out of season. Saw pups being taken by shadows that shouldn't exist in their realm. Saw entire communities fleeing lands that had become hostile overnight. And she saw what the council had been hiding, that they'd been deliberately weakening the barriers for years, creating controlled chaos they could then solve, making themselves indispensable while the realm slowly died around them. Fury rose in her, hot and righteous, and her power surged in response. Careful, Kaelan's voice came from somewhere distant. Control it. Channel it. Don't let anger drive you. He was right. She forced the fury down, transmuted it into determination instead. Drew on the pack's collective strength and began to weave. Not creating new barriers, she couldn't replicate Astoria's original work. But repairing them. Finding every fracture, every weak point, every place where the system was failing and pouring power into the gaps until they sealed. It was delicate work, requiring precision rather than force. Like surgery performed on reality itself. Time stopped meaning anything. She might have been working for minutes or hours or days. All that existed was the next fracture, the next repair, the next piece of the vast puzzle that was holding the realm together. The pack sustained her. When her reserves began to deplete, they poured more strength through the bonds. When her focus wavered, they anchored her. When doubt tried to creep in, they surrounded her with absolute faith that she could do this. That she was doing it. The barriers knitted back together under her will, under her power, under the combined strength of everyone who'd chosen to stand with her. And as they healed, she felt reality stabilize. Felt territories solidifying again. Felt shadow creatures being pushed back through ceiling rifts. Felt the realm exhale in relief as balance was finally restored. When the last fracture sealed, when the anchor point blazed with renewed strength that would hold for centuries, Lunara released the connection and collapsed. Kaelan caught her before she hit the ground, his arms wrapping around her, his voice urgent in her ear. Lunara, stay with me. You did it. The barriers are holding, but I need you to stay with me. She tried to answer, tried to tell him she was fine, but her body had other ideas. She'd burned through every reserve, drawn on power she hadn't known she possessed, channeled forces that should have destroyed her. Only the pack's support had kept her alive through it. And now that the work was done, now that the adrenaline was fading, her body was demanding payment for everything she'd pushed it through. Sleep, Kaelan murmured, and she realized he was carrying her, moving away from the shrine, away from the circle of exhausted pack members who'd given everything to help her succeed. Sleep, and when you wake up, I'll show you what you accomplished. How many lives you saved. How the entire realm is celebrating right now because the barriers are holding again. His voice was the last thing she heard before darkness claimed her. But it was gentle darkness. Healing darkness. The kind that came from a body pushed to its absolute limit and finally allowed to rest knowing the fight was won. She woke 3 days later to sunlight streaming through windows and the sound of celebration echoing from outside. For a moment she just lay there, taking inventory. Her body ached, but it was the good kind of ache, the soreness that came from hard work rather than injury. Her power was depleted but not gone, already beginning to replenish itself now that she wasn't actively channeling. And most importantly, she was alive. Whole. Herself. She'd done it. Had repaired the barriers. Had fulfilled the prophecy. Had become exactly what Astoria's legacy needed her to be. You're awake. Lunara turned her head to find Kaelan sitting in a chair beside the bed, his expression exhausted but radiant with relief. His hair was wild, his clothes rumpled, and he looked like he hadn't slept since the shrine. Like he'd been keeping vigil, waiting for her to open her eyes. How long? She asked, her voice rough from disuse. 3 days. The healers said your body needed time to recover from the power expenditure. We've been monitoring you constantly, your breathing, your heartbeat, the flow of magic through your system. You scared us, Lunara. You burned so bright at the end that we thought. He stopped, his jaw tightening. We thought you might have given too much. But she hadn't. Had given exactly what was needed and no more, protected by the pack bonds that distributed the load. The barriers, she asked. Holding perfectly. Stronger than they've been in decades, according to the elder wolves who remember how they felt before the fracture started. Shadow creatures have retreated. Territorial borders are stable. Weather patterns are normalizing. His smile was small but genuine, transforming his face. You saved the realm, Lunara. Every wolf in every territory is alive right now because of what you did. The weight of it should have been crushing. Should have made her feel responsible for millions of lives, burdened by expectations she could never meet. But instead she just felt peaceful. Complete. Like she'd finally done what she was meant to do, fulfilled the purpose she'd been running from her entire life. What happens now? She asked. Kaelan stood slowly, moved to sit on the edge of the bed, his hand finding hers. Now you recover. Take time to heal, to rest, to let your power stabilize. The realm isn't going anywhere. The barriers will hold for centuries without needing repair. You've earned peace, Lunara. Time to just exist without fighting or training or constantly preparing for the next threat. peace, time. The concepts felt foreign but achingly desirable. And after, she pressed. After I've recovered, after things have settled. What then? His gold eyes met hers, and in them she saw everything he'd been holding back. Every word he hadn't said. Every feeling he'd suppressed in service of duty and prophecy and careful control. Then he said quietly, intensely, I keep my promise. Every moment I've been holding back. Every word I haven't said. Every choice I've been waiting to make until the timing was right. He leaned closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. But first, because we have time now, because you're safe and the realm is stable and there's nothing forcing us together except choice, first I'm going to ask you something. And you can say no. You can tell me you fulfilled the prophecy and now you want to explore the realm, find your own path, build a life that isn't tied to an Alpha King with more baggage than any one person should carry. His expression was vulnerable, open, showing her everything he usually kept so carefully controlled. Or you can say yes. You can choose to stay here in the Northern Territories with a pack that already considers you family. With an Alpha King who's spent every moment since pulling you from that river falling in love with you. Love. The word hung between them, precious and terrifying and everything she'd never dared to hope for. You love me? The question came out smaller than she intended, disbelieving despite everything. Completely, Kaelan confirmed without hesitation. Absolutely. In ways that have nothing to do with prophecy or guardian bonds or ancient magic. I love you, Lunara. Your strength, your kindness, your refusal to become bitter despite everything they did to you. The way you look at the world with hope when you should have learned cynicism. The way you fight for people who haven't earned it because you believe everyone deserves a chance. He shifted closer, his forehead resting against hers, his breath warm against her lips. So I'm asking, will you stay? Will you build a life here with me, with a pack that chose you before you were prophesied heir? Will you let me spend the rest of my life showing you exactly what it means to be loved the way you deserve? Tears were streaming down Lunara's face, hot and unstoppable, but they weren't tears of pain. They were release. Relief. Joy so intense it hurt. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I choose you. Yes to all of it. His smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face, making him look young and unburdened and happy in ways she'd never seen. And finally, he closed the distance between them and kissed her. It was nothing like she'd imagined. Better. Deeper. A claiming and a promise and a beginning all wrapped into one perfect moment. His lips were warm, sure, moving against hers with a hunger that had been building for weeks. His hand tangled in her hair, angling her head to deepen the kiss, and she responded with everything she had, all the want, all the trust, all the love she'd been holding back waiting for this exact moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers again and laughed. A sound of pure, unrestrained joy. Worth waiting for? He asked, slightly breathless. Worth everything, she confirmed, and pulled him back down for another kiss that promised this was just the beginning. But that's not where the story ends. Not really. Because outside, beyond the healing suite where an Alpha King kissed the air he'd searched across territories to find, the realm was celebrating. Wolves from every territory were gathering, sharing stories of the moment the barriers stabilized, of shadow creatures retreating, of lands healing overnight. And in quiet places, in sacred groves and ancient shrines, old magic stirred. Recognizing that the Silver Crest line had returned. That the balance Astoria died to preserve had been restored. That prophecy had been fulfilled not through force or domination, but through the courage of one girl who refused to let cruelty make her cruel. The council retreated into shadows, their power broken, their lies exposed. Some disappeared entirely. Others faced justice from territories who'd finally seen the truth of their corruption. But their threat was ended, diminished, reduced to cautionary tale rather than ongoing danger. New councils would form. Better ones, hopefully, built on transparency rather than control. But that was work for another day. Another generation. For now, the realm could simply breathe, could heal, could remember what peace felt like when it wasn't balanced on the edge of collapse. And in the Northern Territories, Lunara learned what home meant. Not a place, not a building or territory or even a pack, though she loved all of those things. Home was the man who looked at her like she was his entire world. Home was the wolves who'd stood with her when they had every reason to fear her instead. Home was waking up without dread, training without pressure, laughing without permission. Home was finally, after 22 years of being told she was worthless, believing she had value, believing she was exactly who she was meant to be. Weeks turned into months. The mate mark appeared one morning, not immediately after the kiss, not forced by prophecy, but when they were ready. When they'd chosen each other completely, without reservation, without doubt. Two crescents intertwined, one silver and one gold, marking them as permanently bound in ways that went beyond guardian duty. Mates. Partners. Equals who'd found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful from survival. They had challenges ahead. The realm wasn't perfect just because the barriers held. There would be politics, disputes, wolves who resented the power she carried. But they would face it together, with a pack at their backs, with purpose that went beyond mere survival. They would face it as themselves. Lunara, the girl who'd been tormented and hunted and nearly destroyed, who'd risen from the ashes of her own pain to become exactly what the realm needed. And Kaelan, the Alpha King who'd searched across territories because he'd seen someone worth saving in prophetic dreams, only to discover she didn't need saving. She needed someone to stand beside her while she saved herself. Together, they would build the kind of future Astoria had dreamed of. The kind of realm where power served rather than controlled. Where bloodlines were honored rather than exterminated. Where every wolf, marked or unmarked, could build a life worth living. That was the real prophecy. Not that one girl would repair the barriers, but that her courage would remind everyone what they could become when they stopped tearing each other apart. So here's the real question, the one that matters. Would you have chosen her side? When the pack was hunting her, calling her cursed, demanding her death, would you have seen past their fear to the girl fighting for survival? When the council claimed she was dangerous, that her power would destroy everything, would you have believed them? Or would you have recognized that every empire built on oppression fears the one thing that could topple it, someone who refuses to bow? When she stood at that shrine, burning herself out to save wolves who'd never shown her mercy, would you have lent your strength? Would you have been part of that circle, pouring your power into hers, choosing unity over division? Or would you have been the voice calling for caution, for restraint, for sacrificing one life if it meant protecting the comfortable lies you'd built your world on? The truth is, we all make that choice. Every single day. When someone's being torn down for being different, do we join the mob, or do we stand between them and the stones? When someone powerful claims they're protecting us through control, do we believe them, or do we ask who benefits from our fear? Lunara's story isn't just fantasy. It's every person who's been told they're too much or not enough. Every dreamer dismissed as dangerous. Every truth-teller silenced by comfortable liars. Every survivor who kept breathing when the world wanted them erased. And the question remains, which side are you on? The ones who demand conformity, who fear change, who would rather burn down the future than risk losing their grip on the present? Or the ones who stand in silver flame, who channel ancient power, who choose courage over comfort every single time? If this story lit something inside you, if you felt Lunara's pain, celebrated her victories, or found yourself rooting for the girl who refused to stay broken, then you belong here, in Shayla's Romance Library. Because this is where we tell tales that burn. Stories about the ones who rise from ashes. About mates who choose each other despite prophecy, not because of it. About power that heals instead of destroys. About love that sees every scar and calls them beautiful. Hit that subscribe button if you're ready for more. If you want stories that make you feel everything: rage, hope, desire, triumph. If you're done with safe narratives that never challenge you, never push you, never make you question which side you'd actually choose when the stones start flying. We're building something here. A library of voices that refuse to whisper when they should roar. A collection of stories that remind us courage looks like a girl with no mate mark standing against 200 warriors and making them blink first. So subscribe. Hit the bell. Become part of this pack that chooses the outcasts, the survivors, the ones too powerful to contain and too determined to break. Because Lunara's story is just one of many. And trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next.